I went on a funny yet horrible date. So there I was, sitting in a car with Mr. Pancake, and in the blink of an eye, I'd somehow managed to make him feel like a beauty pageant runner-up for nerds. I tried to explain myself, but with every word I said, he seemed to sink deeper into what I can only describe as the stages of shock, disbelief, and sheer confusion. "Oh no, I didn't mean it like that," I babbled, desperate to undo my own foot-in-mouth moment. "I just meant, he was like your vibe." Somehow, this was even worse because now he looked at me like I'd handed him a shovel to bury our date. I felt panic rise in me, but in true awkward fashion I just started laughing uncontrollably instead. Because, nothing says, "I find you attractive," quite like an offbeat laughter fit in the middle of a misunderstanding. He glanced over, slightly weirded out. I could see his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter, knuckles going white. "Are you okay?" he asked, sounding slightly terrified, which just made me laugh harder. At that point, he must have thought he was dealing with a full-on maniac. Just when I thought I'd managed to somewhat rein it in, he cleared his throat, straightened up, and declared, "It's really tough being misunderstood." He was trying to sound serious, probably aiming for a philosophical moment, but the tone was just so over the top that I lost it again. "Pancake, don't be so dramatic," I blurted out. "Oops." He froze, and I immediately realized calling someone by their food-sounding last name is rarely endearing. I desperately tried to turn it around. "I mean not pancake. Like, pancake, the noble pastry of the people?" Now he was visibly trying to maintain a straight face. "For the first time, aita for breaking up with my boyfriend over politics? So, today I, 25F, broke up with my boyfriend, 27M, of over 3 years, and I feel like I'm spiraling, questioning if I made the right call or if I totally overreacted. For some background, politics has never been the focus of our relationship. I always knew we didn't exactly see eye to eye on a lot of things, but we had this sort of unspoken agreement to just avoid those topics. I figured that was fine. I thought that if we loved each other enough, we could agree to disagree, like we were some modern-day Romeo and Juliet with vastly different news feeds. But then today, with the election and everything, all these feelings I'd been stuffing down started bubbling up. I realized that I couldn't ignore the differences anymore, and I needed to know where he really stood on some things. It all started with what I thought was an innocent question. "Are you planning to vote?" He just gave me a shrug and said, "Nah, I don't care." It threw me off because I thought, even though he's not as vocal about politics as I am, that he would at least feel something about voting. I mean, it's just a basic way to participate, But there he was, casually dismissing it like it was nothing. I asked him why he felt that way, hoping he'd elaborate, maybe give me some thought-out response. Instead he just said, "Both are terrible. I'm not voting for the dictator or the Democrats' Hail Mary." He had this bored look on his face, and it felt like he was completely disregarding something I hold really close to my heart. Trying to keep calm, I pressed on, asking him to explain his stance more. He laughed and said, "I'm going to be like World War II Belgium and stay neutral." I know it sounds minor, but it hit me so hard. I felt this wave of disappointment because it wasn't just about politics. It was about him dismissing something so important to me with a joke. Here we were, having what I thought could be a meaningful conversation about something that impacts our lives and our future, and he was treating it like a throwaway historical quip. I felt like I was looking at him under a microscope and seeing this whole side of him that I'd ignored or made excuses for. I suddenly realized we weren't just on different sides politically, we had completely different value systems. We somehow drifted into a conversation about reproductive rights. To add some context, we had a pregnancy scare a couple of years ago, so this is personal for me. I brought up how important it is to have leaders who consider issues like this, and he brushed it off, saying, "As a man, abortion isn't my issue." I was honestly speechless. I had this overwhelming feeling that he was choosing not to empathize, that he was almost refusing to understand something that could have a massive impact on my life. I reminded him about our past scare, how terrifying it was, and asked what he would want to do if we found ourselves in that situation again. His response? "We're in Virginia, we're fine." That was it. That was the moment that broke something in me. It was like looking at him under a microscope and seeing this whole side of him that I'd ignored or made excuses for. I suddenly realized we weren't just on different sides politically, we had completely different value systems. He's not a bad person, and he's been a loving, supportive partner in a lot of ways. But his apathy toward things that matter so much to me felt too big to ignore anymore. I needed to take a step back and really look at our relationship for what it was, not just what I wanted it to be. After he left, I started spiraling, replaying all these moments from our relationship in my mind. The little things he used to do to make me laugh, the way he'd rub my shoulders after a long day, the late-night talks where we'd dream about our future. I started questioning if I'd made a huge mistake, if maybe I was just being irrational, throwing away a relationship over something that maybe wasn't as crucial as I thought. I couldn't shake the feeling that I might be overreacting, but every time I circled back to that conversation, I felt that same emptiness. I felt like I needed a partner who would stand by me, not someone who didn't even see why it was worth showing up. Throughout the day, friends were texting, asking how I was, if I'd voted, and every message just reminded me why I ended things. My best friend, who knows both of us really well, came over with wine and I spilled everything to her. After listening to me vent, she made a comment that really hit home. You're not mad because he disagrees with you. You're upset because he doesn't care enough to have an opinion. That cut straight to the heart of it. I started thinking back to all the times he'd stayed silent on things that mattered to me. Social issues, climate change, even little things like family arguments. He'd always just go with the flow, almost like he was a passenger in his own life. I realized that, without even noticing, I'd been compromising my beliefs for years, hoping that as we got older, he'd start caring more. But the truth is, I was with someone who didn't even think it was worth trying. And that hurt. It hurt more than anything because it made me feel like my values didn't matter in our relationship. As I type this out, I feel this strange mix of relief and sadness. I know that this breakup will haunt me in small ways. I know I'll miss him. But I also know that I can't keep feeling this frustrated and unheard every time something important comes up. Maybe I'll look back one day and feel silly for ending things over this, or maybe I'll see it as the moment I stood up for my own beliefs. Either way, I feel like I deserve to be with someone who at least tries to understand what I care about, even if we don't always agree. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Even though it's still painful, I believe I made the right call. The relationship wasn't working for me, not because he was a bad person, but because we were growing in different directions. And that's okay. It's okay to outgrow someone. And sometimes, the hardest part of a breakup is letting go of the future you thought you would have. But once you let go, you make space for a better future. And that's what I'm doing now, making space for a life that's true to me. It's been a few more weeks now and I'm still processing everything. Some days I feel like I'm doing better and others I feel like I'm back at square one. The loneliness is the hardest part. It's not even the empty space in the bed next to me, it's the moments where I remember the little things that once felt so natural. The way we'd always have a cup of coffee together in the morning, or how he'd know exactly what kind of movie to pick when I was feeling down. Those are the things I miss most. I miss the companionship. I miss the idea that we had a future together, even though that future didn't really exist. But what's keeping me going is the realization that I made the right choice. It wasn't easy and it still doesn't feel fully real, but I know deep down that walking away was the best decision for me. It wasn't just about politics, it was about how we were fundamentally different in how we viewed the world. He couldn't see things from my perspective, and I couldn't ignore the fact that I needed someone who could. Not just in the big moments but in the everyday things that make a relationship work. I need someone who sees me, not just as a partner but as a person whose beliefs and values matter. One of the hardest things to admit is how much I let myself ignore the red flags. I was so focused on what we had, on the love I felt, that I overlooked how often he checked out of important conversations. Even when it wasn't politics, just things that mattered to me in general. I think I thought that love would make up for those things, that I could somehow change him, or that he would change over time. But the truth is, people don't change unless they want to, and he didn't want to. And that's okay. But I need to stop blaming myself for things that were never mine to fix. I've had more deep conversations with friends during this time, and they've reminded me of something important. Relationships are supposed to lift you up, not drain you. It's not just about the good times, it's about the hard conversations and the growth that comes from them. And honestly, I don't think we were growing. We were coasting. We had a routine, a rhythm, but it wasn't the kind of relationship that challenges us to evolve together. I didn't feel like I could be my full, unapologetic self around him, especially when it came to my values. And I'm starting to realize how toxic that can be. If you can't be fully yourself in a relationship, then it's not really a partnership. It's a compromise that's slowly chipping away at who you are. I've also started to look at dating in a new light. I'm not jumping into anything anytime soon, but I'm starting to understand that I need someone who not only agrees with me on the big things but someone who respects my individuality. Someone who has their own opinions and is willing to listen, grow, and discuss those opinions. I need someone who's okay with challenging me, and I need to be okay with challenging them in return. I don't want another passive partner. I want someone who's engaged with life, who has passions and values that drive them, and who will respect the fact that I have my own. Another part of me, though, still can't help but feel like I wasted so much time. 3 years. 3 years spent with someone who I thought would be my partner for life. That's not a small thing to let go of. And I'm not just grieving the relationship, I'm grieving the person I thought he was and the future I envisioned with him. That's been hard to accept. But I'm also starting to see how much potential I've been holding back by staying in something that wasn't serving me. I'm realizing how much I can do when I don't have to compromise on the things that matter. I've also been thinking about the bigger picture. Like, if I couldn't get through the hard stuff with him, if we couldn't have meaningful conversations about the things that shape our world, then how could we face the future together? We were talking about everything else, but the core things, the things that define who we are and how we want to live, were always ignored. If I can't talk about my rights, my future, my values with my partner, then how can we build something lasting? The future doesn't feel like something that can be ignored. It's not just about who wins an election or who gets the last word in an argument, it's about the kind of world we want to live in and what we're willing to fight for. And if we're not aligned on those things, I don't think there's much hope for the long haul. Right now, I'm just trying to focus on me. I've started meditating again and I'm reading books I never had time for. I'm spending more time with family and I'm reconnecting with old friends. I feel like I'm finally rediscovering parts of myself that I lost along the way. And while the pain is still there, it's starting to feel like it's fading into the background. It's not that I've forgotten him, far from it, but I think I'm learning how to live my life without the weight of constantly wondering if I made the right decision. I think I did. I really do. Maybe I'll be ready for a new relationship in the future, but right now, I'm focused on growth. On becoming the person I was meant to be without having to apologize for who I am. I know it won't be easy and I'm sure there will be moments of doubt, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of the future. I'm excited for what's ahead, even if it means being single for a while. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Even though it's still painful, I believe I made the right call. The relationship wasn't working for me not because he was a bad person but because we were growing in different directions. And that's okay. It's okay to outgrow someone. And sometimes, the hardest part of a breakup is letting go of the future you thought you would have. But once you let go, you make space for a better future. And that's what I'm doing now, making space for a life that's true to me. My husband, 29M, knocked out my brother, 28M, for calling me, 26F, a whore, and my parents want me to choose. What is the right choice? First of all, I want to thank everyone who commented on my previous post and apologize for how I worded it. I was really emotional and just needed some support. I appreciate the kindness I've received from so many of you. For context, my husband is my choice and I have no intentions of leaving him. Never had any doubts about that. But I'm still processing everything, and things have become more complicated than I ever imagined. The situation. So, it all started when my parents invited me over to have a talk. They specifically told me to come alone because they didn't want my husband there. But he wasn't having it. He said that if I went alone, they'd just gang up on me, and that he wasn't going to let that happen. He insisted that if they wanted to talk to me, they'd have to accept him too. I agreed with him and we both went. When we got there, my parents were clearly not happy to see him. My mom started to say something but my husband cut her off, telling her he wasn't there for them but for me. He said if they forced him to leave, I would leave with him. Eventually they reluctantly agreed. My brother was there too, though he didn't say much. Here's what I found out. Apparently, my brother had just gone through a breakup with his girlfriend a month ago. I wasn't aware of the details since we're not that close, but apparently she ended it with him. He didn't take it well at all. According to him, the reason he had such a meltdown and called me a whore was because he was jealous of my perfect life. He said seeing my happy posts with my husband on social media was too much for him to handle. He claimed that seeing all of that reminded him of how he was struggling in his own life. It got worse when he overheard me talking to my mom about trying to have a baby with my husband. That just sent him over the edge. He got angry apparently because I had something he didn't, something he desperately wanted with his ex. The confrontation. At one point he went after me and that's when my husband stepped in. He pulled my brother aside and warned him to stop with the disrespect. My brother didn't take it seriously and just blew him off. Things escalated and my husband told him that if he didn't knock it off, there would be consequences. That's when the whore comment came up and I was left speechless. I couldn't understand why my brother would say something like that to me, especially since he knows the truth. My husband has been my first and only in every way. I confronted him about it and asked why he was calling me that. He refused to answer. I also asked him if he thought trying to have a baby with my husband made me a whore, and all he did was walk out of the room without saying a word. Family reaction. When I asked my parents why they didn't step in sooner to stop my brother, they just shrugged it off. My dad said he wanted to intervene, But my mom insisted that we should leave my brother alone because he wasn't actually hurting anyone. That really hurt. No one was standing up for me and it felt like I was completely alone in that room. Things only got worse from there. My mom suggested that maybe my husband should apologize to my brother for what happened. But my husband refused. He made it clear that he would never apologize for standing up for me. When my mom pushed him, he asked her, "What would you do if someone called your wife a whore?" And my dad, in an attempt to avoid conflict, said he would have a talk with the person, but he wouldn't hit anyone. My husband laughed and told him that if he didn't defend his wife more aggressively, he was weak-willed and spineless. At that moment, I saw my mom's face go red with anger. I knew she wasn't happy, but I also felt like she was ashamed of my dad for not standing up for me. I could see it in the way they looked at each other. There was a lot of unspoken tension. I decided it was time to leave. Setting boundaries. On the way out, I told my parents that I would be going low contact with them for now. The ultimatum they gave me shattered my trust in them. I understand they were trying to protect my brother, but in doing so, they hurt me. I told them that if they could respect my boundaries, we would see each other again. But right now, I needed space. Before we left, my husband went over to my parents to greet them. He politely said goodbye, but then turned to my dad and told him it was time to grow a backbone. It was awkward and uncomfortable, but honestly I felt like it needed to be said. I saw a flicker of shame on my mom's face, like she knew deep down that what had happened wasn't okay. The aftermath. Since that meeting, things have been tense. My cousin reached out to me and told me that the rest of the family had a go at my parents for not standing up for me. Apparently, my brother's ex cheated on him and he's been struggling to cope with that. He's been convinced that all women will eventually betray him, which is why he lashed out at me. But that doesn't excuse the way he treated me. I haven't heard from my brother directly and honestly I don't plan to. He hasn't apologized for what he said, and I don't think I can move forward without an apology. My parents have also been silent, and while I don't expect them to agree with me, I do expect them to respect my choices. So where do I go from here? I don't know what the right choice is. My husband and I are fine and I'm not leaving him. But my relationship with my parents has been strained, and I don't know how to fix it. I've already made it clear that I won't be tolerating disrespect from anyone, but I'm not sure how to navigate this new reality with my family. If you've been through something similar, how did you handle it? I'm just trying to figure out what's best for me without losing myself in the process. Update. A twist I didn't see coming. I wasn't planning on updating so soon, but I've received a lot of messages asking about how things have developed. Honestly, things have been messy, but a few unexpected things have happened that I feel like I should share. The family fallout continues. After my last post, I took some time to really think about everything. My brother, the one who called me a whore, hasn't reached out with an apology or any form of reconciliation. He's been silent, which just confirms to me that he's not ready to take accountability for what he said. I'm not sure what it will take for him to apologize, but I'm not holding my breath. However, there's been some unexpected fallout with my parents. My cousin wasn't the only one who reached out. Several other family members have now messaged me. They've all expressed concern over the way my parents have been handling the situation, and some even admitted that my brother's actions were unacceptable. This came as a surprise because for so long, I felt like no one in the family was willing to stand up for me. It seems like the rest of the family is starting to see the truth, that my brother was out of line and that my parents didn't handle things well. Some of them even called my parents out directly for not stepping in sooner when my brother insulted me. From what I've heard, a few relatives are even planning to have a conversation with my parents about their treatment of me. To be honest, it feels like I'm finally getting the support I should have had all along. My parents' reaction to the family's response. What's been even more interesting is how my parents have been reacting to all of this. My mom, who was so adamant about protecting my brother, has gone quiet. I think she's starting to realize how much damage she caused by choosing him over me in that moment. My dad, on the other hand, has been oddly more receptive to what people are saying. I'm not sure if it's because he feels guilty or if he's starting to see things differently, but he did reach out to me in a text message to apologize for not standing up for me sooner. The apology wasn't perfect, and he didn't fully take responsibility for the ultimatum they gave me, but it was a start. He told me that he was wrong for letting my brother get away with disrespecting me and that he wished he had been more supportive. It was hard for me to process, honestly. I've been so angry at both of them for so long, but this was the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, they might try to make things right. What's next for my relationship with my parents? I'm still not sure where I stand with my parents. I've made it clear that I need space and that I won't tolerate disrespect, but at the same time I don't want to completely cut them out. I've been thinking a lot about my relationship with them and what it would take for me to heal and move forward. Part of me feels like I need to set even stricter boundaries. I've already told them that I don't want to be around my brother until he apologizes for what he said, and I meant it. But I also feel like I'm stuck in this limbo where I'm caught between my husband and my family, and I don't want to feel like I'm constantly having to choose sides. My husband has been amazing through all of this. He's been supportive and understanding, and I truly appreciate how he stood by me. But I can't deny the tension that still lingers between him and my family. I don't know if I can ever go back to having the kind of relationship I once had with my parents. That trust is broken, and I think it'll take a long time to rebuild. I want to move forward, but I don't want to pretend like nothing happened. The brother situation. As for my brother, I'm still completely at a loss for how to approach him. He hasn't apologized, and I don't think he's truly ready to admit how wrong he was. From what I've been hearing, he's still bitter about his ex, and it seems like he's channeling all that anger toward women, including me. It's honestly really sad to see him like this, and I'm not sure if there's any hope for reconciliation until he deals with his own issues. Part of me feels like I should be the bigger person and reach out, but then I think about the things he said to me, things that were not only hurtful but completely untrue. I don't want to have to forgive him for the sake of family unity when he hasn't done the work to earn that forgiveness. The bigger picture. I guess the bigger lesson here is that family doesn't always have your back in the way you expect. I always thought my parents would stand by me, but in that moment they didn't. I've learned that I can't rely on anyone to protect me except myself, and that's not a bad thing. My husband and I have a strong relationship, and I know that I have his support no matter what happens with my family. I also feel like I'm learning how to set healthier boundaries. For so long I've tried to keep the peace with my family, but now I realize that peace doesn't come at the expense of my own self-respect. I won't allow anyone to treat me like I don't matter, even if that means distancing myself from those I love. Next steps. I'm going to continue to take things day by day. I'm not sure what the future holds with my family, but I know that my husband and I are stronger than ever. I'm also going to keep my distance from my brother until he shows some genuine remorse. I'm not going to beg for an apology, and I'm not going to let anyone make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. Thanks again to everyone who's supported me through all of this. I really appreciate it more than you know. Update: a surprising change of heart? Hey everyone, it's been a few weeks and I've been taking some time to reflect on everything that's happened. I wasn't sure if I should update again, but so many of you have sent such supportive messages, and some of you are curious about how things have evolved. Well, I've got a bit of a surprising update, so here goes. A step toward healing, or not. I won't lie to you, things between my family and me are still pretty tense, but I think there's been some unexpected movement on both sides. After my last post, I kept my distance from my parents as I said I would. I didn't cut them off completely, but I've been keeping things strictly cordial. There were no big family gatherings, no deep conversations, just the occasional text. To be honest, I've been trying to focus on my own mental health and keeping my relationship with my husband strong. But then, about a week ago, something strange happened. My dad called me out of the blue. I didn't know what to expect, whether it was going to be another round of "I'm sorry but you need to understand your brother," or whether he was finally going to take responsibility. When I picked up, he started by acknowledging everything I had said in my last conversation with him. He apologized again for not standing up for me, which wasn't new, but this time it felt different. He admitted that he had been blind to my brother's behavior, and for the first time, he seemed to understand how deeply it hurt me that he wasn't there for me when I needed him most. He told me that he realized that his own fear of conflict had clouded his judgment, and he couldn't keep siding with my brother at my expense. It was a little like hearing him speak for the first time as my dad, not just a parent who wanted to avoid drama. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't sure if I should accept it right away or if I was just hearing what I wanted to hear, so I told him I needed time to think. I wasn't ready to forgive him fully, but it was the first real step toward healing, I think. The brother situation, a no-go. As for my brother, well, I'm still getting nothing from him. He hasn't reached out at all. Not even a text. He's still playing the victim and refusing to take responsibility for calling me a whore. It's like he's living in his own little world of anger and bitterness, and I don't think he's ready to hear the truth. I found out through a cousin that my brother is still bitter about his ex and is now directing all that rage toward any woman who reminds him of what happened. He doesn't seem to understand that his actions hurt me, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to deal with him anymore until he shows some maturity. The problem is that my parents keep trying to push me to forgive him, even though they're the ones who should have stepped in from the beginning. They think that if I just speak to him, everything will magically go back to normal. But I don't think it's that simple. It's like they want me to sweep everything under the rug and act like nothing happened. That's not something I'm willing to do anymore. So, I've made it clear to them once again that I'm not going to engage with my brother until he takes accountability for his actions. Where do I stand with my parents? Now the big question, where do I stand with my parents? I'm still conflicted. On one hand, I want to believe that they've come around, especially with the way my dad has been reaching out and taking ownership of his part in this. On the other hand, I can't ignore how my mother and father both stood by my brother in the beginning. My trust in them is still shaky, and I'm not willing to just go back to the way things were before. It's like I can't just forget the hurt no matter how much they apologize. At the same time, I'm not ruling out the possibility of rebuilding that relationship. I'm open to the idea of a healthy, respectful relationship where my boundaries are respected, but it's going to take time. My husband has been encouraging me to keep moving forward and not look back. He's been a huge emotional support throughout all of this, and he's been really understanding of my need for space from my family. He told me that he's willing to be patient with whatever happens, but he won't tolerate any more disrespect toward me, and I know he means it. What I've learned. Through all this, I've learned a few important things. Self-respect is non-negotiable. I've realized that I don't have to settle for anyone's mistreatment, not even my family's. I'm worth more than that, and I'm not going to allow anyone to treat me like my feelings don't matter. Boundaries are key. Setting boundaries even with family is crucial. I've always been the peacemaker, trying to keep everyone happy, but I've learned that sometimes, you have to put yourself first and say no when something feels wrong. Forgiveness takes time. I'm not rushing into forgiving my brother or even my parents. They have a lot of work to do if they truly want to repair our relationship. Forgiveness isn't something you just give out because someone asks for it. It's something earned through action, and right now they're still working on proving they deserve it. Healing isn't linear. Some days I feel strong, like I've made peace with everything, but other days I feel drained and confused. Healing isn't a straight line, and I'm learning to be patient with myself. So what now? I'm going to continue focusing on my own well-being and my marriage. I'm not going to rush into any decisions regarding my family. I've learned that I can't force things to be the way they once were, and I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm constantly having to choose sides. It's been a rocky road, but I'm slowly finding my way back to a place of peace. I'm not sure where things will go with my parents, but I'm not in a rush to make any final decisions. I'll take it day by day and see how things develop. Thank you all for your support and for reading through this. I know I've shared a lot, but your words have really helped me get through this challenging time. Update. A difficult choice, but I'm moving forward. Hey everyone, it's been a few more weeks since my last update, and I've had time to reflect on everything that's unfolded. I wasn't sure if I should post again, but so many of you have been reaching out asking for an update, and I thought I should let you know where things stand. So here it goes. A conversation with my brother. I was taken aback when I received a message from my brother. It was the first time he reached out since everything happened, and I was honestly unsure of how to feel. I didn't know if this was another attempt to manipulate or deflect blame, or if he was actually ready to acknowledge what he did. The message was brief. He apologized, sort of. He said he was sorry for being an asshole and that he realized he let his jealousy get the best of him. He even admitted that calling me a whore was completely uncalled for, and he wished he hadn't said it. But then, as expected, he followed it up with excuses. He mentioned how his life fell apart and that he was lashing out because of his broken relationship with his ex. He didn't directly apologize for his actions toward me, and he seemed to shift the blame to his own personal struggles, almost as if it was a justification for his behavior. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to process it. Part of me felt relieved that he had reached out, but another part of me felt disappointed. His apology felt hollow, and I couldn't help but notice that he still hadn't taken full accountability. It was more about him seeking some form of absolution without fully understanding how deep the hurt went. I took my time, but eventually I sent a message back. I told him that I appreciated the apology, but it was hard to accept when he hadn't fully grasped the damage he had caused. I told him I needed him to take responsibility for his actions and show real remorse, not just offer a surface-level apology to ease his own guilt. I made it clear that until he could understand the depth of what he did, I wasn't ready to reconnect. That's where we're at with my brother. He hasn't responded yet, and honestly, I'm not holding my breath. I've come to terms with the fact that it might be a long time before he's truly ready to face the consequences of his actions. My relationship with my parents. As for my parents, things are still up in the air. My father's apology for not standing up for me seemed genuine, but I can't help but feel like he's still walking on eggshells around my mother. She's been more distant, and even though she claimed she understood where I was coming from, her actions haven't fully reflected that. There have been moments where I felt like I'm not entirely welcome, like I'm just another obligation to them. I'm not saying I'm giving up on them, but I'm being cautious. I'm still keeping my distance, trying to see if their actions match their words. I don't want to be in a position where I'm the only one doing the work in rebuilding the relationship. The other day my dad tried calling again. He said he wanted to talk about things and apologized once more for how everything went down with my brother. But this time I asked him to meet me in person. I needed to see him face to face to gauge whether he was truly committed to understanding my perspective or if it was just another round of empty apologies. I'm still not sure what I'm going to do with that meeting, but I think I need to lay out some hard truths. I also made it clear that if they truly want to have a relationship with me, they need to stop pushing me to just forgive and forget. I'm not in a rush to mend things. It'll take time and they need to respect my boundaries. My husband's role. As for my husband, he's been amazing throughout all of this. I honestly don't know what I would have done without him. He's been supportive, patient, and understanding. He's been consistent in his position. He stands by me and he won't tolerate anyone disrespecting me. We've had many long talks about everything. He's been my rock and he's helped me find my voice. He constantly reassures me that I don't have to face this alone, and I appreciate that more than I can express. I know that he's been affected by all of this too, especially the tension with my family, but he's never wavered in his commitment to me. In a way, this whole situation has strengthened our bond. We've been having more open conversations about the future. Our plans, what we want from our relationship, and how we're going to handle things moving forward. The one thing we both agree on is that we don't want any drama with family getting in the way of our happiness. Where I stand now. So, where do I stand now? I'm in a much better place than I was a month ago. I found some peace in the chaos. It's not easy and it's still a work in progress, but I'm learning to trust myself and my instincts more than I ever have before. I've stopped feeling guilty for putting myself first, and I've stopped letting the expectations of others dictate my choices. I'm in control now and it feels empowering. As for my family, I'm still open to the idea of healing, but I'm not rushing it. I've made it clear that my boundaries are non-negotiable. I can't just forgive and forget. I need to see that my parents and brother are truly committed to understanding the hurt they've caused and that they respect my decisions moving forward. For now, I'm taking a step back from family drama and focusing on my marriage. The relationship with my husband is my priority, and I'm not willing to let anyone, or anything, undermine that. The future. As for the future, I'm just taking it one day at a time. I'm not sure how things will evolve with my parents or brother, but I'm no longer afraid to stand up for myself and what I believe is right. Whatever happens, I know I've got the support I need, and I'm stronger than I was before all of this started. Thanks again to everyone who has reached out, and to all of you who have given me advice and support along the way. It's meant the world to me and it's helped me get through one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. Update: the aftermath and growing pains. Hey everyone, I know it's been a while since my last update, and I just wanted to let you know how things are going. I've been trying to process everything that's happened, and I feel like I'm finally ready to share more. This whole situation has taught me a lot about boundaries, relationships, and what it means to prioritize my own well-being. So, let me dive into where I am now. The relationship with my brother. Since the last update, my brother hasn't made any further attempts to reach out. To be honest, I don't know if I should be surprised or relieved by that. Part of me wants him to come to terms with his actions and take full responsibility, but another part of me is at peace with the distance. I'm no longer emotionally invested in trying to fix things with him at this point. He's made his choices, and I'm tired of chasing someone who isn't ready to admit they were wrong. It's hurtful, yes, but I'm starting to realize that my relationship with him may never be the same again. And that's okay. There's a limit to how much someone can disrespect you and still expect to be a part of your life. I've stopped thinking about him constantly, and the relief from the constant stress of worrying about what he'll do next has been freeing. The only thing that still lingers is the unresolved guilt that sometimes creeps in. The idea that family should always beat family, no matter what, but I know deep down that some boundaries have to be set for self-preservation. My parents' reactions. As for my parents, things have been tense. My father has been calling me more often than usual. The conversation typically revolves around asking me how I'm doing, but there's still a noticeable tension in the air. He still avoids talking directly about the confrontation between my husband and my brother, and I can tell that part of him still feels conflicted about where his loyalty lies. My mom has been distant as I expected. I don't think she's fully grasped why I made the decisions I did, and I'm not sure she's ever going to. She hasn't outright said anything negative, but I can feel the disapproval in her silence. The fact that she sided with my brother so quickly still stings, and I know I can't just forget that. But I also know that no matter how much I might want to have a perfect relationship with them, I can't ignore the way they've treated me in all of this. So, I've continued to keep my distance, only engaging with them when necessary. I've also stopped trying to make my parents understand everything. They might not, and that's a hard pill to swallow, but I've accepted it. I'm learning to move on without expecting anything from them. This might sound harsh, but I feel like I've been more honest with myself than I've been with them in years. The ongoing strain with my husband's family. Interestingly, there's a little more tension from my husband's side of the family now. As things have calmed down between me and my family, some of his relatives have started making subtle comments about family drama. They don't want to get involved but have let it be known that they think he shouldn't have reacted the way he did. I'm not angry at them. I understand their point of view, but it's still frustrating to hear, especially since no one seemed to care when my brother outright insulted me. I've had a couple of conversations with my husband about how he feels with all this external pressure. He still stands by everything he did to protect me, and honestly, I don't blame him. I've told him I'm grateful for his support, but I also don't want to see him get pulled into this drama for too long. We've agreed to keep our focus on our life together, our goals, and eventually starting a family. I don't want to let anything distract from that. Despite some of the outside comments, he's remained as supportive as ever, and we've had some really meaningful conversations about what the future holds. I feel even more confident in our relationship, and I know that we're a team. No matter what happens with our families, we have each other. The decision to go low contact. So, after a lot of soul searching, I've made the decision to go low contact with my parents. I've stopped trying to convince them to understand me, to see things from my perspective. The pressure of trying to keep the peace for the sake of family has been draining. I'm no longer going to put my energy into people who can't respect my decisions and boundaries. It's painful, but I know it's the right choice. It's not easy to turn my back on my family, but I'm learning that sometimes you have to protect yourself, even if that means distancing yourself from toxic relationships. I've told my parents that I'm not cutting them out completely, but until they respect my boundaries and stop enabling my brother's behavior, there's no point in pretending everything is fine. If they ever want to truly reconnect, they'll have to meet me halfway. But I'm no longer waiting for that day. I'm moving forward with my life, looking toward the future. Looking ahead, I'm focusing on what matters. My relationship with my husband and building the future we want. I'm not letting the past weigh me down anymore. It's been hard, but I'm slowly starting to feel free from the chains of family expectations and drama. I know it's going to take time, but I'm learning to heal. I'm starting to prioritize my mental and emotional well-being. And above all, I'm not apologizing for any of the choices I've made. I'm learning that I don't need to justify my decisions to anyone, not even to the people I've known my whole life. To everyone who's supported me along the way, thank you. Your words have been a huge comfort, and I'm incredibly grateful for the kindness I've received. This community has helped me more than I can say. The first time I saw him, it was by chance in the library. Among the rows of wooden shelves, bathed in a warm yellowish light, he stood there, completely absorbed in an old leather-bound book. He wasn't the kind of man who would catch your attention right away, but there was something about him. Something in the way he moved, the way his presence seemed to occupy the space around him. I couldn't help but look. Our eyes met for only a moment, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. He smiled, just a faint hint of a smile, and then he returned to his reading. I tried to do the same, but the words on the page blurred as my attention kept drifting back to him. Somehow, inexplicably, he'd managed to capture my full attention. As I passed his table, I noticed the book he was reading. Old, dusty, its pages tinged with yellow. I couldn't see the title, but the air of mystery it radiated piqued my curiosity in a way I hadn't felt in ages. On impulse, I stepped closer, pretending to browse the nearby shelf, though I couldn't stop myself from glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. It was as if he knew exactly what he was doing, and somehow, that made him all the more intriguing. Then his deep, calm voice broke the silence. Interested in ancient literature? I looked at him, surprised. I wasn't sure if he was speaking to me or if he'd merely noticed my interest. But before I could respond, he met my gaze with a piercing look that held both intelligence and something more. Something I couldn't quite place. You could say that, I replied, feeling a slight tremor in my voice. I tried to steady it, but his presence was so intense that my heartbeat quickened just being near him. He invited me to sit, and almost automatically I accepted. I wasn't in the habit of accepting invitations from strangers, but there was something about him, a kind of dark magnetism that felt impossible to ignore. As soon as I sat down, he slid the book toward me, pointing to a specific passage. This author had a way of seeing the world that few understood, he said in a low voice, his tone thick with a quiet intensity that drew me in immediately. I glanced at the passage he'd pointed out. The text was in an older style, dense with symbolism. The words seemed to whisper secrets to me, things I could sense but not fully comprehend. I looked at him, curious, trying to see what had captured his interest. "It's strange, but fascinating," I said, hoping my voice sounded casual. He nodded, a faint smile on his lips as if he'd expected my answer. The conversation flowed easily, though each word felt loaded with a barely perceptible tension. With each passing minute, I found myself more captivated by his way of speaking, the way his eyes held mine, almost as if he were trying to read me. I realized I didn't even know his name, but I didn't want to break the mystery by asking. He was an enigma, and that only drew me to him more. As we talked, I noticed a ring on his left hand. A simple silver band. I didn't say anything, but something in my chest tightened at the sight. I tried not to dwell on it, but a faint unease settled over me. Was he married? Why would a man like him be here, alone, chatting with me in a library? At that moment he suddenly closed the book with a snap, breaking the spell that had enveloped us. "I hope to see you here again," he said, and with that he stood up and walked away, leaving me alone with a million questions and a racing heartbeat. I sat there in silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was something strange about him, something that awakened all my senses, a blend of curiosity and attraction, yet tinged with danger. I couldn't get him out of my head for days. Every time I tried to focus on my studies, his image would creep back, bringing with it that weird feeling he'd left in my chest. It wasn't just his gaze or his voice, it was everything about him, that mix of mystery, like he knew something I didn't. I tried to tell myself it was just a casual conversation, that it didn't mean anything, but I wasn't fooling myself. There was something else there, something that pulled me in, and I had no idea why. A week later I went back to the library. Part of me hoped he'd be there, like he'd just appear out of nowhere, reading another one of those old books full of secrets. I wandered through the same aisles, even sat at the same table where we'd talked, pretending to read, though honestly I was just thinking about him and that strange connection I'd felt. But he wasn't there. Nearly resigned, I decided to leave. I walked toward the exit, disappointed, though I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. And just then I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Back looking for mysteries?" I turned, and there he was, looking at me with that same expression, half curious, half something I couldn't quite place. My pulse sped up, and I tried to play it cool, though I wasn't sure how well I was hiding my nerves. "Maybe," I said, trying to sound casual. "Or maybe I just like this place." He smiled, a knowing smile like he could see right through me. He invited me to get coffee at a little cafe just across the street. Without thinking too much, I said yes. It made me a little nervous, but I couldn't resist. There was something about him, like a magnet pulling me in. The cafe was cozy, with wooden tables and warm lights. We sat in a corner, where the noise from the other people faded into a distant hum, leaving us in this strange little bubble. For the first few minutes we kept it light, talking about university books, random things that didn't matter. But as time went on, his voice got lower, like he was sharing a secret. He told me things about the book from the library, stories about old writers and dark thoughts on life and love. He spoke with so much intensity that I hung on to every word. Sometimes his eyes locked onto mine in a way that made my skin tingle. In those moments, it felt like the rest of the world disappeared, and it was just us, completely isolated. It was during one of those silences that I felt his hand brush against mine, just the lightest touch, but firm. My breath stopped for a second. I wasn't sure if it was on purpose or an accident, but I didn't pull my hand away. There was an uncomfortable, charged silence, full of something I hadn't felt before. In that tiny touch, it felt like he'd said everything words couldn't. When he finally got up, the tension between us was almost overwhelming. He looked at me, holding my gaze a bit longer than necessary, then whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. "Sometimes mysteries are more dangerous than they seem." And with that he said goodbye, leaving me there, tangled in a mess of emotions I couldn't quite process. There was something dark about him, something that pulled me in and, at the same time, felt like playing with fire. That night I barely slept. I tossed and turned, every word, every look, every brush of his hand. His warning kept echoing in my head. Sometimes mysteries are more dangerous than they seem. What did he mean? Why did he say it with that intensity, like he was trying to leave me a real warning? It reminded me of those stories where the main character ignores a sign and falls deeper into trouble. But instead of scaring me, it just made me want him more. That mix of mystery and danger only made me want to know him better. Days passed, and I found myself going to the library nearly every day. It felt like everything in my life was now revolving around the chance of seeing him again, of hearing that voice that sent shivers across my skin. I hated myself a little for it. I felt like I was losing control, but at the same time I couldn't stop. Each day without seeing him felt like a disappointment that dragged me down, even though I kept telling myself I'd stop searching for him. And just when I was nearly convinced that all of this was a ridiculous obsession, I saw him. He was in the farthest corner of the library with another one of those ancient books. This time, though, he didn't wait for me to come over. He looked at me as soon as I saw him and, with a barely noticeable gesture, motioned for me to sit beside him. I didn't hesitate. Sitting next to him, I realized I was more nervous than before, though I tried to hide it. He looked at me for a few seconds in silence, like he was sizing me up, as if he wanted to see something in me that he hadn't figured out yet. Then, without warning, he opened the book and started reading me a passage in a low voice. The words were old, full of symbolism like before, but this time the way he read, his deep, slow tone, made each word feel like a caress, like a pull toward something dark and unknown. As he read, I felt the space between us getting smaller and smaller. The library was completely silent, and at that moment, it felt like no one else existed. There was a tension in the air, almost touchable, and his hand resting close to mine didn't feel like an accident. It was as if he were waiting for the perfect moment to touch me again, without any rush, enjoying my anticipation. Finally, he closed the book and looked at me, his eyes dark and intense. There was something new in his expression, something he hadn't shown before, like he was considering crossing some invisible line. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said in a low voice, leaning a bit closer to me. His breath was warm against my skin, and I couldn't stop a shiver from running through me. My heart was racing, and even though every part of my mind told me I should step away, that this game could lead me into something I couldn't come back from, I found myself staying, caught in the weight of his gaze. I didn't know if he expected me to say something, but I couldn't speak. I was frozen, lost in that mix of attraction and tension that only kept building. "But you already know that, don't you?" he added in a tone so low I could barely hear it. At that moment, his hand moved over mine, this time with no hesitation, and I felt the warmth of his skin against mine. The library, the silence, even the book lying closed in front of us, it all disappeared. There was something in his touch, an intensity that made me lose all sense of time and place. For an instant I was completely aware I was crossing a line, that after this, nothing would be the same. I don't know how much time passed before he finally pulled his hand away and stood up, keeping his gaze locked on me. "We'll see each other soon," he said in a tone that left no room for doubt. And he walked away, leaving me there, somewhere between excitement and confusion, completely lost in the game he'd somehow already taken control of. Ever since that encounter in the library, my mind was trapped by thoughts of him, like he'd left some invisible mark I didn't want to erase. Everything about him called to me, his voice, his words, that constant feeling of danger surrounding him. I tried to go on with my life, focus on my studies, see my friends, but nothing distracted me. It was as if everything else had become irrelevant. One afternoon, while wandering aimlessly through the streets, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it immediately. "I hope you enjoy mysteries as much as last time. I'll be waiting for you at our usual cafe." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know how he'd gotten my number, but somehow that only made it more intriguing. I tried not to seem too eager, but as soon as I was ready, I found myself walking to the cafe, barely thinking about what I was doing. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a corner with a cup of coffee in front of him, as if he'd been there for a while. I walked over, trying to keep calm despite the thrill I felt crawling up my skin. He greeted me with the faintest of smiles, that same smile that seemed to hide something he'd never say out loud. "You like your coffee with a touch of sugar, right?" he asked, sliding a cup over to me like he already knew every detail. I didn't remember telling him that before, but somehow, it didn't surprise me. It felt like he'd always known things about me, little details I wasn't even fully aware of myself. I took a sip and looked at him, waiting for him to break the silence. For the first few minutes, we stuck to small talk as if both of us were trying to ignore the growing tension between us. But it didn't take long before the conversation took a different turn. Almost without meaning to, he began talking about that book from last time, explaining how those ancient authors had ideas about love and attraction that went far beyond the conventional. He said that, for them, a real connection between two people had to be intense, dangerous, something that left you on the edge. His gaze didn't leave mine as he spoke, and I felt like his words were meant for me, like he was describing exactly what I'd started to feel. Every word he spoke pulled me in further. I felt trapped in his voice, the way he seemed to analyze me, studying my reactions. There was a moment when his hand brushed mine again, but this time he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers slowly traced over mine, following a gentle path that made my skin tingle. I knew it was intentional, and I knew he enjoyed seeing how it affected me. And somehow I enjoyed it too. It felt like the atmosphere in the cafe had grown heavier, as if all the background noise was starting to fade. Everything focused on him, his voice, the warmth of his hand. He talked about how most people settle for shallow connections, while he was looking for something deeper, something more dangerous. He didn't say he was looking for it with me, but I felt like that was the true implication. After a few minutes of this game of words and glances, he leaned toward me, with an intensity in his eyes that left me breathless. There were only a few inches between us, and the heat from his closeness made every nerve in my body tense. "You know this isn't ordinary, right?" he whispered, his voice low and soft, like it was a secret just for me. I nodded, unable to respond with words. I felt that if I tried to speak, anything I said wouldn't make sense. I was caught in that closeness, in the slow rhythm of his breathing that seemed to sync with mine. For a moment, there was absolute silence, where both of us seemed to be holding our breath. And then, before I could even react, I felt his fingers brush my face, just barely touching me. The softness of his touch made my whole body respond, like I was completely out of control. It was a silent invitation, a challenge, and I realized somehow he already knew I would accept. Ever since I'd left that cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about his touch, the way he brushed my skin, the electricity that seemed to spark through every inch of me. There was something about him that brought out feelings I barely understood, and the harder I tried to ignore it, the stronger it got. I must have checked my phone 100 times, waiting for another message, a sign that I wasn't alone in this obsession. And then it finally came. Tonight. The library. Top floor. No details. But I didn't need any. I already knew I'd go without a second thought. Just the idea of seeing him again, of feeling that tension between us, made me shiver with anticipation. When I got to the library, it was empty and silent. I climbed to the top floor, feeling my heartbeat quicken with each step. He was there, waiting in the shadows as if he'd been sure I'd come. He didn't say anything when I approached. Instead, he took my hand and led me to a dark corner between the shelves. The dim light wrapped around us, and the privacy of the spot made the air feel even thicker. He stopped, looked into my eyes, and that gaze, it was like he could see straight through me in a way no one else ever had. I don't know who moved first, whether it was him or me, but within a second we were so close I could feel the warmth of his body against mine. His fingers brushed over my face, tracing slowly down my neck. It was a light touch, but full of intent, and every place his hand lingered seemed to come alive. My breathing quickened, and he noticed, giving me that small, knowing smile, like he enjoyed watching the effect he had on me. "You're shaking," he murmured, his low voice wrapping around me. I couldn't answer. All I could feel was his hand on my skin, his fingers moving lower, skimming over my shoulders and down my arms. Every motion was slow, as if he wanted to savor each of my reactions. His other hand slid to my waist, pulling me even closer until there was no space left between us. His breath mixed with mine, and in that moment, nothing else existed. His lips brushed my neck, barely a touch, but it sent a wave of heat through me. Almost instinctively, my hands found his back, pulling him closer, wanting more of him than he seemed willing to give just yet. Every second felt like I was on the edge of something unknown, something he controlled perfectly. Finally, his lips found mine. It was a slow kiss, but full of something deep, something that made me lose myself completely. Every move, every touch, was part of a game where we both knew there was no turning back. His hands held me firmly, and in that instant I realized I was completely in his hands, that he was in control, and I didn't care one bit. The world around us disappeared. It was just the two of us, hidden away in that corner of the library, lost in a connection that felt as dangerous as it was addictive. He didn't move immediately after my words. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken thoughts, as if we were both waiting for something. For the right moment. For the right choice. Or perhaps, for something beyond either of us to take control. I could feel the warmth of his presence, his energy swirling around me, but I was no longer just aware of him physically. My mind was consumed by questions, by the puzzle of who he really was. What was he after? What was he looking for in me? And more than anything, why did I feel this irresistible pull toward him as if nothing else mattered? His gaze softened, just a fraction, but there was still that knowing intensity behind it. He had seen through my defenses, and in a way I felt almost exposed. Not in a way that made me want to run. No, it was a different kind of exposure, the kind that made me feel vulnerable but strangely alive. Slowly he moved back from me, his eyes lingering on my face. You think you know what you're ready for, he said, his voice low, almost like a whisper. But there's so much more than that. His words weren't a warning, they were a statement. And for reasons I couldn't understand, I felt the need to know more to see what he meant. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to steady myself. I don't care about what's easy anymore, I replied, the words coming out stronger than I had expected. I want to understand everything. I want to feel what this is, what's between us. His lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't the teasing smile I'd seen before. It was something else. Something deeper. I knew you would say that. I watched him closely, a strange sense of anticipation creeping over me. It was as if everything he said, everything he did, had been carefully orchestrated. Nothing about him seemed accidental. His movements were deliberate, purposeful. And for the first time, I realized that maybe this wasn't just some game to him. Maybe he was as lost in this as I was. He stepped back toward me, his pace slow, measured, as if giving me a chance to stop him, to rethink everything. But I didn't move. I didn't want to move. It felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't escape, and part of me didn't even want to. His hand came up to my face again, his fingers grazing my cheek as he gently tilted my head to the side. "What's inside of you?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost tender. "What do you think this is? A game? Or something else entirely?" I couldn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air, like the weight of everything I had been avoiding. I had spent so much of my life pretending I had control, pretending that I knew what I wanted. But standing here with him, feeling the connection that seemed to pulse between us, I realized I didn't have the answers. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. What I had built in my mind and what was truly happening seemed to be merging into one, and the lines between fantasy and reality blurred. His thumb brushed against my lips, pulling me from my thoughts. "Don't think too hard about it," he murmured. "Just feel." Without giving me a chance to respond, he leaned down, his lips capturing mine again, this time with a kind of urgency I hadn't felt before. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't slow. It was raw, hungry, as if he had been holding back just as much as I had. And when his lips parted mine, when his tongue touched my own, everything I had been trying to keep buried surged to the surface. The kiss deepened, more desperate now, and I felt a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, confusion, and yet the undeniable thrill of being on the edge of something I couldn't fully comprehend. It was as if each touch, each movement, was unraveling me, stripping away the layers I had carefully constructed over the years. But just as quickly as the kiss had started, he pulled back, his breath coming in short gasps. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes closed for a moment as if he were trying to regain control. "You're not ready," he said, his voice low, but there was no judgment in his tone. "Not yet." The word stung more than I expected. I had thought we were beyond hesitation, beyond any walls. But hearing him say it, he was right. I wasn't ready. Not fully. But it didn't matter. Because whatever this was, whatever it could become, it had already started. And it had a hold on me now. I opened my eyes to look at him, my heart racing. What happens now? His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something flicker in them, something deeper, darker. It was like he was weighing me, trying to decide what to do next. "Now," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "we see how far you're willing to go." And with that, he stepped back again, his gaze never leaving mine, as if he were daring me to make the next move. The following days passed in a blur of anticipation and reflection. I found myself replaying the moments from that night over and over, each memory clearer than the last. The way his eyes had locked onto mine, the soft pressure of his touch, and the unspoken understanding between us. It felt like we had entered into a world of our own, a place where the boundaries between us had melted away, leaving something raw and real. But with every passing hour, I also became more aware of the delicate balance we were walking. There were times when I'd question myself, wondering if I was losing control, letting emotions and desires cloud my judgment. Yet, every time I thought about pulling away, his presence would fill my mind again, stronger than before. It was as though he had become a part of my thoughts, impossible to push out. Then one evening as I sat alone, my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. A simple message, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. "Tonight. I want to see you." That was all it said. No address, no specifics, just a call to come. The invitation felt different this time. More intimate, more certain. And though I still had questions, doubts even, I knew there was no turning back. I didn't even hesitate before responding. I arrived at his apartment, once again following the familiar path up the stairs. The building felt quieter than usual, the silence almost expectant, as if everything around us was holding its breath. When I knocked, the door opened almost instantly as if he had been waiting for me, knowing I would come. He greeted me with the same intensity as before, but this time, there was a calmness to him, a steadiness that grounded me. His smile was subtle, yet it held something deeper now, an unspoken understanding that we had both crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Still, there was no need for words. His presence was enough. Without a word, he took my hand, and we moved through the apartment as though we had done it 1,000 times before. Everything about the space felt familiar now, the soft glow of the lights, the quiet hum of the city outside the window. It was as if this had become our world. This time we didn't rush. There was no immediate urgency to anything. Instead, we sat together on the sofa, close but not touching, the space between us charged with anticipation. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, steady and unwavering, and I couldn't help but meet it. There was something so deeply knowing in his eyes, as if he understood me better than I understood myself. For a long while we simply looked at each other, the silence between us pregnant with meaning. Finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking about you," he said, the words heavy with sincerity. I swallowed, my breath catching in my throat. There was something about the way he said it, so simple, yet so profound, that made my heart race. "I've been thinking about you too," I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. And just like that, the distance between us closed. His hand reached out to gently brush my cheek, and the touch was electric, sending a rush of warmth through me. I leaned into it, craving the connection, the closeness that seemed to pull us together in ways I couldn't explain. We didn't need to speak anymore. Every glance, every touch, was enough to communicate everything that needed to be said. There were no barriers left between us, just the raw honesty of the moment. I felt completely and utterly seen, and in turn I saw him too. His vulnerabilities, his desires, the quiet strength that had drawn me in from the start. As the night went on, time seemed to stretch and bend around us, as if the world outside no longer existed. The moments we shared were suspended in a way that made everything else feel insignificant. It wasn't about the physical closeness, it was about something deeper, something unspoken, that bound us together in a way that was impossible to ignore. When I left his apartment that night, it wasn't with the same sense of uncertainty that had accompanied my earlier departures. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a quiet understanding that whatever this was between us, it was far from over. There was something more beneath the surface, something I was just beginning to uncover, and I couldn't help but feel like I was only at the beginning of this journey with him. This connection, this bond, it was something neither of us could easily walk away from. We were in it now, and whatever came next, we would face it together. Broke up with my GF because of unemployment. It's understandable to feel lost and conflicted in situations like these, where life throws one challenge after another, testing your emotional and mental limits. The feeling of unemployment can chip away at your sense of self-worth, especially when you feel like you're doing everything you can, but the world around you doesn't seem to be responding the way you need it to. And in a relationship, when you're already under that kind of stress, it can be even harder to balance your own frustrations with the needs of your partner. After I broke up with her, I thought the space would help me clear my head. But instead, it felt like I was drowning in my own insecurities. I spent hours pacing around my small apartment, staring at the walls, wondering if I had made the right choice. Would things have been different if I hadn't let my pride get in the way? The anger that had built up inside me during those months of rejections and financial struggles hadn't dissipated at all. It was still there, gnawing at my insides, but now it was mixed with an overwhelming sense of guilt. I missed her. It was hard to admit, but I did. Even though I had been the one to call for space, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I remembered the way she tried to cheer me up, even when she had her own things to deal with. She was always trying to make me feel better, to encourage me to keep pushing forward. And yet, I had shut her out, turned inward, and let my pride cloud my judgment. In the process, I pushed away the very person who had stood by me through so much. Days turned into weeks, and I still hadn't heard from her. I tried to keep busy with my job search, but every time I sat down to apply or prepare for interviews, my mind kept drifting back to the same question. What had I done? What was the point of all this if I couldn't even keep the one relationship that mattered to me? Then came the day I finally landed a job. After months of rejection, the opportunity felt like a lifeline. It wasn't in HR, and it wasn't glamorous, but it was a job. Something that would pay the bills, something that meant I could finally start rebuilding my life. And yet, even as I walked into that new role, I felt a gnawing emptiness inside. Sure, I had the job, but I didn't have her. It was a hard realization, but I had to admit it. I had sabotaged myself and the most important relationship in my life because of my own pride, jealousy, and frustration. The truth hit me harder than anything else I'd faced so far. I had convinced myself that I needed space, that I needed time to figure things out. But what I really needed was her. The job was a small victory, but it wasn't enough to fill the void I felt. I decided that I couldn't let the situation end this way. I had to own up to my mistakes. I knew I couldn't take back the hurt I caused, but maybe, just maybe, I could try to make things right. So I reached out. I sent her a message, something simple, something honest. I've made a mess of things and I owe you an apology. I miss you and I'm sorry for what I did. I was wrong. I didn't expect an immediate response. I didn't know if she'd even want to hear from me, but I had to at least try. I had to face the consequences of my actions and show that I was ready to take responsibility for them. The waiting felt endless. I spent every minute wondering if she'd read the message, if she'd even care. But then, a few days later, I got a reply. It was short, but it was enough. She said she'd been hurt, but she appreciated the apology. She was still upset, but she was willing to talk about everything when the time was right. That was all I needed to hear. Even though things were far from fixed, it was a start. We had a long road ahead of us, but I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. It wasn't easy. After I sent that message, I spent days in limbo, caught in a storm of doubt. Every time my phone buzzed, I couldn't help but check, hoping for a reply, praying that the words I had sent hadn't been too late. When the reply finally came, I didn't know what to expect. Her words were measured, not angry, but there was a cool distance to them. She said she needed time, and I respected that. I knew I couldn't just rush back into her life, demanding everything be fixed right away. It was going to take time for the trust to rebuild, for her to heal from the emotional weight I had placed on her shoulders. The job I'd landed didn't feel as sweet anymore. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I would find myself thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, hoping she was okay. I kept wishing I could rewind time, undo the mistakes I had made. It wasn't just about the breakup. It was about the way I had let everything affect me, the way I had turned my back on someone who truly cared. Days passed and we didn't talk much. I focused on my work, doing my best to keep up appearances, even though inside I felt like I was barely holding on. I'd had my fair share of sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling, lost in my own thoughts, but I kept telling myself that I had to be patient. She would come around, I hoped. I had to give her space, respect her boundaries. But there were moments when that nagging guilt would hit me again, reminding me of the hurt I had caused. It wasn't until about a month later when we finally spoke again. I had just gotten off work and was heading home when my phone buzzed. It was her. She said she was ready to meet and talk things through. I felt a surge of relief but also a deep sense of dread. I wasn't sure what would happen when we sat face to face. Would she be as angry as I feared? Would she walk away for good? I told her I'd meet her wherever she wanted. We agreed on a small coffee shop, a neutral ground where we could just talk. The hours leading up to it were agonizing. My hands were clammy, my thoughts racing. What would I even say? How could I fix things that seemed so broken? When I arrived at the cafe, I saw her sitting at a table by the window. She looked different, calmer, but there was still a hardness to her eyes. I walked over and sat down across from her. There was an awkward silence between us before she spoke first. You know, she began, her voice soft but steady, I thought a lot about what happened. About how everything fell apart. I was hurt. A lot. She paused and I could see the weight of her words. But I get it. You were struggling. I saw it. I knew it. I just didn't understand why you pushed me away instead of letting me help you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. The guilt I had been carrying for so long intensified, but this time it was different. It wasn't just self-loathing, it was a deep regret for not letting her in, for not trusting her enough to lean on her when I should have. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling too small to express the depth of my feelings. I should have talked to you. I should have let you help, but I was too caught up in my own pride. I didn't want to feel weak. And then I let my frustration control me. She nodded, her eyes softening. I know. I want to know that you learned from this. That you won't make the same mistake again. Her words were a challenge but also a chance. A chance for me to prove that I had grown, that I understood the weight of my actions and their consequences. I wasn't the same person I had been when I broke up with her. I was still working through my issues, but I was willing to put in the effort this time. I said, my voice steady. And I will. I don't want to lose you again. I know I have a lot to prove, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. We talked for hours that day. It wasn't easy. We covered the pain, the doubts, the hurt, but also the love that had always been there beneath it all. By the time we parted ways, it didn't feel like everything was fixed, but it felt like we were starting to rebuild piece by piece. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other again, but it wasn't like before. Things were slower, more cautious. We both had walls up, but we also had something deeper now, a mutual understanding that we couldn't go back to the way things were. We had to move forward, together, but with the wisdom of knowing what had been broken. I still didn't have all the answers. I still wasn't perfect. But I had learned something valuable, that pride, jealousy, and fear could destroy everything if you let them. And that love, true love, requires vulnerability, trust, and the willingness to let go of your own ego. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face it, with her and with a clearer perspective on the man I wanted to be. The months after that conversation felt like a slow but steady healing process. It wasn't a fairy tale comeback, where everything magically fell back into place. No, it was more like the delicate art of reassembling something that had shattered into pieces, and then carefully gluing those pieces back together, one by one, until you could see a faint shape of what it once was. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We had our ups and downs. Some days felt light, like we were rediscovering the rhythm we once had, laughing over inside jokes and sharing quiet moments that felt natural. But there were also days when the scars would resurface, and we would feel the weight of the past, the things we hadn't quite healed from yet. There were times I would see her pull away just a little, as if testing how much she could trust me again. And I couldn't blame her. I had broken something. It wasn't enough to say sorry, and it certainly wasn't enough to promise it would never happen again. Trust, once fractured, takes time to rebuild, sometimes even longer than you'd expect. It was hard for me too. I still had moments of doubt, of wondering whether I could keep up the effort, whether I could be the person I had promised to be. Some nights I would lie awake thinking about how things had gotten so bad, and if there was a way to truly undo the damage. I wondered if I had missed my chance, if the relationship was doomed to stay fractured no matter how hard I tried. But every morning when I saw her, those worries seemed to fade a little. She was still there, still willing to try. And so was I. One evening, after we'd spent a quiet night cooking dinner together, I decided to ask her about something that had been weighing on me. We were sitting on the couch, eating the leftovers, the kind of night where nothing had to be said but everything felt comfortable. But I knew I needed to address it if we were going to keep moving forward. I've been thinking, I started cautiously. I know we've been taking things slow and I don't want to rush anything, but I also don't want us to end up stuck in the past. I don't want to keep worrying about the same mistakes I've made. I want to focus on the future. Our future. What do you think about that? She didn't answer right away and I could see the wheels turning in her head. I could feel the tension in the air, that moment where both of us were unsure of how to proceed, but also knowing we had no other choice but to face it. I think we're still figuring out what that future looks like, she said slowly. But I do want that. I want to believe that we can make it through, that we can get past this. It's not easy. But we have to stop looking backward or we'll never get anywhere. I could hear the weight in her words. She wasn't saying it was all okay. She wasn't glossing over the pain. But she was willing to take that step forward with me. And that meant everything. To me, it meant that we weren't giving up. Not yet, not for something that still had a chance to work. I don't know how I would have handled it if you had walked away for good, I said quietly. I know I was a mess and I didn't give you the respect you deserved. But you've been patient with me and I don't want to waste that. I'm not here to punish you, she said, her voice softening. I just needed to see that you were really willing to change. And I think you are. I think we both have things we need to work on, but that's part of it, right? Her words gave me a sense of peace I hadn't realized I needed. They weren't grand declarations of love or promises of forever, but they were real, honest. And in that moment, I knew that rebuilding wasn't about having everything figured out, but about being willing to put in the effort, together. It wasn't always easy after that. There were moments when I doubted myself again. I had to remind myself that healing wasn't linear, and that progress was made in small, seemingly insignificant steps. We still had arguments. We still faced challenges. But the difference was that now, instead of tearing each other apart, we worked through them. We communicated. We didn't let pride get in the way. As time passed, I found myself growing more confident, not just in my relationship with her, but in myself. I had gotten the job I had been fighting for, and although the road had been long and difficult, I realized that it wasn't just about the job itself. It was about the person I had become. The lessons I had learned about vulnerability, about pride, about pushing through the difficult times. I wasn't the same person who had lashed out in frustration all those months ago. One evening, a year after we had first broken up, we went on a walk together, just the two of us like we used to. We didn't talk much, but there was something comforting in the silence, in the way we shared the space without needing to fill every moment with words. At the end of the walk, she turned to me and smiled, a look of warmth in her eyes. "I'm glad we're still here," she said softly. "I think we've both come a long way." "I'm glad too," I replied, smiling back at her. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." In that moment, I realized that while the road had been difficult, it had been worth it. The lessons, the growth, the mistakes, all of it had led me to this place. And I was ready for whatever came next because I knew we could face it together. The days after that walk seemed to glide by. There was a new sense of comfort between us, a quiet understanding that we had both earned. The past, though it still lingered in the back of my mind, no longer had the power to control us. We weren't defined by the mistakes we had made, but by the way we chose to move forward. The job I had finally secured brought a new sense of stability into my life, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of purpose. I no longer felt like I was simply drifting, hoping for something to change. I was working hard, and though it wasn't the glamorous career I had once imagined, it was a step toward rebuilding my confidence and independence. At first, the long hours were draining and the routine felt almost monotonous. But the more I settled into the work, the more I realized how much it was helping me reclaim a part of myself I had lost during the months of uncertainty. Every day I was growing stronger, not just in my career but as a person. I began to notice the small victories. The feeling of accomplishment when I checked off a task, the recognition from a colleague, the newfound confidence in handling challenges. Slowly, the bitterness I had felt toward the world and my situation started to dissipate. Meanwhile, with her own career advancing, my girlfriend had grown into a place of success that I hadn't been able to see before. I had always admired her ambition, but now I found myself genuinely proud of her. It wasn't just the external accomplishments that impressed me, but the way she carried herself with grace and determination. She had learned to balance her work and personal life, something I had once thought was impossible. But the real shift came when we both started recognizing the importance of space, of independence within the relationship. We weren't the same people we had been when we first met. We had each changed, evolved in our own ways, and we knew that we needed to give each other room to grow, individually and together. One weekend she suggested we take a trip. A short getaway, just the two of us, to somewhere we could disconnect from the daily grind. It was a chance to pause and appreciate the present moment, without the distractions of work or our past. We drove out of the city, leaving behind the stress and noise, heading toward a quiet cabin by the lake. The first evening there, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The stillness of the moment was overwhelming, but in the best way possible. We didn't speak much. There was no need. Just being there, together, felt like everything was in its right place. We were no longer burdened by the weight of the past. "I never thought we'd get here," she said after a long silence, her voice soft and contemplative. "Me neither," I replied, watching the horizon. "But I'm glad we did." It wasn't a perfect moment, and our journey wasn't over, but it felt like we had reached a place of understanding, of mutual respect. We had both been through hell, but we had come out stronger. We had learned not only to trust each other but to trust ourselves again. And maybe that was the most important lesson of all. As we spent the weekend there, we talked more openly about our hopes and dreams. We no longer tiptoed around the sensitive topics or avoided difficult conversations. We had the courage to face them head-on, knowing that it was through those conversations that we would continue to grow, not just as individuals but as a couple. When we returned to the city, everything felt a little different. It was like we had hit a reset button, and now we were moving forward with renewed energy and clarity. My job, her career, our relationship. Everything seemed to fall into place, not because everything was perfect but because we had both worked hard to make it so. The real test would always come when things got tough again. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were ready. We had the tools now: communication, patience, and above all, the commitment to show up for each other no matter what came our way. And as we went about our daily lives, it was no longer about measuring success or failures, about comparing ourselves to others. It was about being in the moment, appreciating what we had, and continuing to build a future, together. Somewhere along the way, I had learned that the greatest thing I could offer wasn't my career or achievements, but the person I had become, someone who could stand by her side through thick and thin, someone who had learned to trust again. And that, more than anything else, was the foundation of everything that lay ahead. With that thought, I held her hand tightly, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it as a team. And in that moment, I realized that the most important thing was not how we started, but how we chose to continue. Together. Life, as it always does, began to settle into its rhythm. The turbulence of the past, unemployment, the misunderstandings, the frustration, seemed like a distant memory now. But even though the storm had passed, the calm it left behind was not without its challenges. We had both changed, and while the growth was undeniable, it wasn't always easy to navigate the new versions of ourselves. The job I had landed became more than just a paycheck. It was a symbol of the new chapter one was living. Every day I woke up with a sense of purpose, a feeling of pride that had been missing for far too long. The work itself wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And every small victory, from solving a problem to meeting a deadline, reinforced the man I was becoming. The man who was starting to believe in himself again. My girlfriend and I had fallen into a natural rhythm, where we both respected each other's space while also making time for the things that mattered most. Our relationship, our shared moments, and our individual growth. There was a balance now, one that hadn't been there before. We communicated openly, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't felt comfortable expressing in the past. In return, she did the same. It wasn't always easy though. Every now and then doubts would creep in. The moments when I'd find myself questioning if I was doing enough, if I was measuring up. I would look at her success, her dedication to her career, and feel the weight of my own insecurities. I'd catch myself wondering if I had done enough to prove my worth, not just to her but to myself. But those feelings didn't last long. They couldn't. I had worked too hard to get to this place of inner peace to let them take hold again. One evening, after a particularly long day, we sat down together on the couch, both of us exhausted but happy. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated the room, casting shadows that made everything feel cozy, safe. She curled up next to me, and for a moment there was no need for words. We just sat in silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. "I'm really proud of you," she said quietly, her voice full of warmth. I looked down at her, surprised by the sincerity in her words. "Why?" I asked, genuinely unsure. "For how far you've come," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you've done it. You've found your footing again. I see you working hard, and I see the man you're becoming. And I'm proud of that." I swallowed the lump in my throat. It had been so long since anyone had said anything like that to me. The weight of her words settled over me, soothing the parts of me that still felt raw. "I'm proud of you too," I said, my voice low but firm. "You've been amazing through all of this. I don't think I'd have gotten this far without you." She smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "We're both doing this together in our own ways. And that's enough." In that moment, I realized just how much I had underestimated the power of support, of believing in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. The love we had shared in the past, the ups and downs, had all led us to this point. We weren't perfect, but we had learned how to make it work. And that was enough. Things were far from perfect, but they were real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, of forcing us to adapt, but in that moment, I knew that the foundation we had built, brick by brick, was strong enough to weather whatever came next. We had faced our fears, our insecurities, and came out the other side better for it. As the months went on, things continued to improve. My job was still a steady part of my life, but I was no longer consumed by it. I had learned that true fulfillment wasn't about having the perfect career or achieving the highest success. It was about finding contentment in the small moments, in the people you loved, and in the person you were becoming. One weekend, we sat down together to plan a future that felt less uncertain. We talked about places we wanted to visit, things we still dreamed of doing, and the life we wanted to build. For the first time, the future didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like something we could handle together. We didn't have all the answers. We still had plenty of challenges ahead. But we had something even more powerful. The understanding that no matter what came our way, we would face it side by side. That bond, that trust, was something no circumstance could shake. And in the quiet moments when we would sit together and just breathe, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't just finding a job, or proving to anyone that I was capable. It was in finding my own worth again, not through external validation, but through the quiet belief in myself, and in the love we had built. The real work was learning to stand tall, to believe that I was enough, not because of what I did or didn't do, but simply because I was. And that was the most freeing realization of all. With each passing day, I knew that whatever life brought, I could face it, with her by my side, and with a heart that had finally learned to believe in its own strength. As time went on, I began to appreciate the little moments more than I ever had before. The pressure of finding a job and constantly proving myself had finally eased, and I could focus on the things that truly mattered. But even as things settled, the scars from the past still lingered. Not in a way that weighed me down, but as quiet reminders of how far I'd come. My relationship with my girlfriend had grown stronger, but there were moments where I would catch myself wondering if we were truly past everything. Could I really leave behind the insecurities, the jealousy, and the bitterness? Would I ever be fully free of the resentment I had harbored for so long? One afternoon, I found myself deep in thought while walking home from work. As I passed a park, I decided to sit for a moment and reflect. I was grateful for where I was, but I still felt there were parts of myself that hadn't healed completely. In the solitude of that park, I allowed myself to face those fears head-on, acknowledging the past without letting it control me. I knew that if I wanted to move forward with my girlfriend, I had to be fully present. Not just in our relationship but in my own life. It wasn't enough to just get by anymore, I had to thrive. Over the next few months, we continued to work on our relationship. There were still moments of tension, especially when it came to money in the future. I was no longer unemployed, but the financial burden of the past still weighed on us both. Sometimes, when things got tough, I could feel the old frustration rising up inside me, like a pressure building to a boiling point. But this time, I had learned to recognize it. Instead of retreating into my shell like I used to, I talked to her. I expressed my worries and doubts, even the fears I had about not being able to fully provide for us, even though I had a job now. She listened, patiently, offering reassurance without judgment. I realized then how much I had underestimated her support. "We're in this together, remember?" she would say, her tone gentle but firm. And that was all I needed to hear. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly or having it all figured out. It was about knowing that no matter what happened, we were partners in every sense of the word. But life, as it always does, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. Just when I thought we were on solid ground, my girlfriend received a job offer. One that was far away in a different city. She had been eyeing it for months, and now it was finally a reality. We had never discussed moving in together, let alone long distance, and the idea of being separated for months at a time felt overwhelming. For days we couldn't stop talking about it. I was proud of her, of course, but a part of me was terrified. Was our relationship ready for this kind of test? Could we handle being apart when we had just started to find our rhythm? The thought of not seeing her every day was difficult, and there were moments when I was unsure if I could do it. But as we talked it through, something shifted. We both realized that this was an opportunity for growth, not just for her career but for our relationship. It would be hard, yes, but maybe we had to prove that we could handle challenges separately and still be strong together. We made the decision to give it a try. She moved and I stayed behind, but we stayed connected through calls, texts, and visits when we could. And though it was tough at first, the distance helped us appreciate each other more than ever before. 6 months passed and things were different. Not just because of the distance but because of how much we had both changed during that time. I had grown more independent, not relying on her to fill the gaps in my life, and she had flourished in her new job, learning more about herself and the person she wanted to be. When she came back for a visit, we sat down and talked about our relationship. It wasn't easy. We had learned that love wasn't just about the good times, but about navigating the hard times too. And I had learned that I couldn't hold on to my old insecurities forever. I couldn't be the jealous, frustrated person I had once been. "I'm proud of how far we've come," I said one evening as we sat across from each other in the small cafe near her new apartment. "Me too," she replied, her eyes soft with understanding. "I think we've proven something to ourselves." We both smiled, a quiet acknowledgement that the hard work had been worth it. We had become two stronger individuals who were now able to come together, not out of necessity, but because we chose each other every day. A year had passed since everything had started, since the job loss, the arguments, the self-doubt. We had weathered the storm, and now we were living in a calmer sea. Life had a way of testing you, but I had learned that the true test wasn't in how you survived the storm, it was in how you learned to sail afterward. Things weren't perfect. There were still challenges ahead. The future, as always, remained uncertain. But we were no longer defined by our past struggles. Instead, we were defined by the way we faced them together. We had both changed. The man I was now wasn't the same as the one who had lost his job, and the woman she was wasn't the same as the one who had patiently waited for me to find my way. And that was the beauty of it. We had grown together and we had grown apart in some ways, but we had done it side by side, each supporting the other through it all. And in that moment, as I looked at her, strong, independent, and full of life, I knew we had found something more lasting than just love. We had found respect, trust, and a partnership that was built to last. In the end, it wasn't about the job or the money or the things we had gained or lost. It was about the strength we found in each other, the way we had become better versions of ourselves, not because of what we had achieved but because of what we had endured and how we had overcome it together. Life began to feel less like a series of tests and more like a journey of growth. My girlfriend and I had come through so much, and though the path wasn't always smooth, we had reached a place where we could truly appreciate what we had built together. The distance had taught us both the importance of patience, communication, and the strength that came from being supportive, even when life wasn't easy. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, laughing at something silly on TV, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't overwhelmed by the past anymore. I wasn't consumed by what I hadn't done or what I had lost. I had learned to appreciate the present moment, the quiet times, the ordinary days, the little things that often went unnoticed when you were caught up in the chaos of life. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. It was a call from a friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. We caught up quickly, and in the middle of our conversation, they asked how everything was going with me and my girlfriend. "We're good," I said, smiling as I glanced at her. "Better than ever." My friend seemed genuinely happy for me, which made me realize how far I had come in accepting myself, my relationship, and the challenges that life threw our way. I had stopped looking for the quick fixes, the instant solutions, or the perfect answers. Instead, I had learned to be content with the journey, knowing that the true value was in the moments of growth, even the hard ones. After I hung up, I sat back on the couch, my arm draped across her shoulders. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the same sense of peace I felt inside. "You know," I said almost as a thought, "I don't think I ever really understood how strong we are until now." She smiled, resting her head against my chest. "Neither did I." We sat in silence for a moment, just being with each other, no words needed. It was in those quiet moments that I realized how much had changed, how much I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had once been consumed by frustration and self-doubt. I had learned to let go of the fear that had once controlled me, and in doing so, I had learned to embrace the beauty of what we had. I knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but with her by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Together we had built something strong, something worth fighting for. It wasn't about having everything figured out, it was about being willing to grow together, to learn from our mistakes, and to face the future with open hearts. And as we sat there, in the stillness of that moment, I knew that the best was yet to come. Because no matter what life threw our way, we had already proven that we could handle it together. The days that followed brought a renewed sense of purpose. After months of uncertainty, frustration, and growing pains, things were finally starting to feel like they were falling into place. But as anyone who's gone through a difficult period knows, the aftermath of emotional exhaustion isn't always a straight path to clarity. Sometimes it feels more like finding a new rhythm, one that doesn't necessarily erase the scars, but allows you to live with them without feeling overwhelmed by their weight. I had started my new job. It wasn't exactly what I had imagined when I first set out on my career journey, but it was a step forward. The work wasn't glamorous, but the environment was supportive, and I found myself slowly getting used to the routine. I had spent so much time doubting myself, thinking that I wasn't good enough, that I was somehow failing, that I had lost sight of what really mattered. The truth was, it didn't matter where I started. What mattered was that I had found something that could provide for me, that could support my dreams, even if they weren't fully realized yet. At night, I would sit by myself sometimes and reflect on the journey. There were still moments of doubt, days when the weight of the past crept in and made me question everything. But each day I kept pushing forward, and slowly, those moments of uncertainty became fewer and farther between. As for my relationship, it had reached a place of deep understanding. We had spent so much time learning to communicate without resentment, without judgment. There were still small disagreements, of course. No relationship is ever perfect, but they felt different now. We were no longer caught in the cycle of blame or frustration. Instead, we had learned to listen, to truly hear each other, even in moments of tension. One evening, as we sat together, sipping tea and chatting about our day, my girlfriend turned to me with a soft smile. It was a quiet, almost casual moment, but there was something about the way she looked at me that made my heart swell with gratitude. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I'm really proud of you." Her words caught me off guard. "Proud of me? For what?" She leaned back, her fingers gently tapping her cup. "For everything. For sticking with it even when things were tough. For being patient with yourself. For not giving up." I felt a lump form in my throat. The truth was, I hadn't always felt proud of myself. But hearing her say those words made me realize how far I had come. The person I was today wasn't the same person who had given in to frustration or let insecurity control his every decision. I had changed, slowly and steadily, and while there was still so much more for me to learn, I was beginning to believe that I could be proud of the journey. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It felt like I was finally starting to breathe again after holding my breath for far too long. She reached over and took my hand. "I love you," she said simply. And in that moment I realized how much that love had carried me through. I wasn't just loved for who I was, but for who I was becoming. It was a love that had seen the darkest moments, but had chosen to stay. It had been patient, forgiving, and unwavering. The days continued, each one blending into the next, but now they felt more like opportunities instead of obligations. I had come to understand that the answers weren't always immediate. Sometimes, life required you to sit with your discomfort, to let it shape you rather than define you. It was in those uncomfortable moments that the most growth occurred. I knew that I wasn't done evolving, that the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward not just in my career but in every aspect of my life. And as I looked over at her, sitting beside me, her hand in mine, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. We had weathered the storm, and though the road ahead might have its challenges, I had no doubt that we could handle whatever came our way. I smiled to myself. Maybe life wasn't about having it all figured out. Maybe it was about accepting the unknown and learning to dance with it. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long while, I was ready for whatever came next. Things began to fall into a comfortable rhythm. I was no longer overwhelmed by the fear of uncertainty, and the weight that had been crushing me for so long started to lift. It wasn't that all my problems had been solved, but the shift in perspective was everything. I realized that life doesn't come with a neat, clear-cut path. It's full of detours, setbacks, and moments where you're just trying to keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible. I'd started to focus on what I could control: my work, my mindset, my relationship. I wasn't so obsessed with the idea of success anymore. Sure, I wanted to keep progressing in my career, but it wasn't just about finding the next big thing. It was about being present in the moment, being grateful for where I was and who I was becoming. In a way, I had come to understand that the person I had been before, frustrated, angry, insecure, was still a part of me, but I didn't need to carry that weight with me anymore. I had grown beyond it, learned from it, and now I was taking those lessons into a future that, while still uncertain, felt full of possibility. One evening as I walked home from work, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my girlfriend. "Can we talk tonight? I have something important to tell you." I felt a flutter of nervousness in my chest. We had been in a good place for a while now, but her message made me wonder if something had changed. I quickly texted back, reassuring her that I'd be home soon. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, her eyes a little more serious than usual. I sat beside her, taking her hand in mine, trying to read her expression. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, her gaze meeting mine. "About everything, about us. I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. And how proud I am of the way you've turned things around." I smiled, but she wasn't finished. She paused, and I could tell there was something more she wanted to say. After a long pause, she finally spoke again. "I think we've both grown so much these past few months. And I think it's time we take the next step in our relationship, together." Her words hit me with a sudden clarity. In that moment, I realized how much we had both changed. We had been through struggles, but we had emerged stronger. We had built something that wasn't just about surviving together, but about thriving, about growing as individuals and as partners. "I'm ready," I said quietly, the truth clear in my heart. "To be the best version of myself, for me and for us." She smiled, her eyes sparkling. And right then I knew we were on the same page. We were moving forward, not because everything was perfect, but because we were willing to work through the imperfections, to learn, to grow, and to keep supporting each other through it all. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt intimidating. It felt like an open road, one that we would travel together, side by side. And no matter what came our way, I knew we were stronger for having gone through the hard times, for having learned how to communicate, to forgive, and to love deeply. I had learned that life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment to arrive. It was about making the most of the moments you had, even when they were messy or uncomfortable. The perfect moment, I realized, was never a destination. It was a journey, and it was the journey itself that made all the difference. And so, with that thought, I embraced the future, whatever it held, and I did so with a heart full of hope, with a love that had been tested and strengthened, and with the knowledge that no matter where life took me, I was no longer afraid. I've had dreams about my ex almost every night since we broke up 6 years ago. It sounds like you're going through a deeply confusing and frustrating experience. Dreams about an ex, especially one who didn't treat you well, can evoke a lot of conflicting emotions, and it seems like you're caught between wanting to forget him and still having feelings that are hard to understand. These recurring dreams, and the emotional response you have during the day, must feel exhausting and leave you feeling stuck. Your desire to move on is completely valid, but these dreams keep pulling you back into an emotional space you don't want to be in. It's like your mind is trapped in a loop, where even though you've logically moved past this relationship, your subconscious is replaying it over and over, leading you to question why you're still thinking about him. It sounds like you're doing all the right things by attending therapy and trying different medications, but sometimes the mind doesn't always respond to treatments in the way we expect. It's tough when you're trying to heal from past trauma, especially when the body and mind don't seem to follow the pace you hope for. It's like you're stuck between the life you've built, which is undoubtedly much better than what it was with him, and the past that keeps creeping in unexpectedly. Your brain might still be processing feelings from that time in your life, even if they aren't conscious desires to be with him. Sometimes, people can hold on to unresolved emotions that get triggered, and it can even be connected to your emotional state at that time. It might also be related to some feelings of rejection, not necessarily because you want him back, but because there's something about that dynamic that continues to affect you, even after all this time. You mentioned that you've had therapy and are on medications that haven't been working to make the dreams stop, which can be incredibly frustrating. Have you ever tried any specific techniques to address the dreams directly? Sometimes things like lucid dreaming techniques, where you try to consciously direct your dreams or tell yourself beforehand that you're in control, can help alter the way you experience them. It's not a guaranteed fix, but it might be worth discussing with your therapist if that could be something to explore. Another thing you could consider is focusing on ways to release any lingering emotions about the past, even if you've consciously moved on. It could be helpful to journal about the dreams or even write a letter to him, which you don't have to send, to express the anger, confusion, or any other emotions that might still be unresolved. It might also help to reflect on what specifically about him or the relationship feels unresolved, because often these dreams can be a sign that there's something deeper your subconscious wants you to address. I understand that, despite all of this, you don't want to revisit him or that relationship, which is completely valid. It's frustrating when your mind works against your wishes, but it's important to remember that even though the dreams feel intense, they don't necessarily reflect your actual desires. They might simply be a way your subconscious is trying to process what happened, even if it was 6 years ago. There's no easy fix, but keep being patient with yourself. Healing can take time, especially when something like this keeps resurfacing. You're already doing a lot of work to manage it, and while it might not feel like it right now, that work is meaningful. Over time, it will get easier to move forward, and you'll start to feel less controlled by these dreams. Stay strong, and know that you don't have to let this experience define you or your future. It's clear that what you're going through is not just a matter of wanting to forget an old relationship. It's something much deeper. You've had years of progress since your breakup, built a new life, created new relationships, and made strides toward healing, but the fact that your mind keeps looping back to him in your dreams shows that there's something unresolved there, something your subconscious mind is still holding on to. The dreams are persistent, and as much as you don't want to acknowledge them, they're clearly having a profound impact on your waking life. You're already taking all the right steps, therapy, medication, trying to understand the root of the dreams, but they just won't go away. It feels like you're caught in a tug-of-war between what you know logically to be true, and what your dreams keep feeding you. This can be especially frustrating because logically, you know that you're better off without him. You were the one who broke up with him after all because he wasn't treating you the way you deserved. And yet, despite all of that, your mind keeps bringing him back, almost as if to keep reminding you of the pain and rejection that you felt. The more you try to push the dreams away, the more they seem to haunt you. That only compounds the frustration because it feels like you can't escape something you don't even want. The fact that you've already done the emotional work and moved on in many ways makes it even more difficult to understand why the dreams persist. And when you're faced with the dream version of him, a version that doesn't feel real or connected to the person he actually was, it's like you're living in this alternate reality where things could have been different. It could almost feel like your subconscious is trying to rewrite history, trying to make sense of what happened, but doing so in a way that doesn't align with who you are today. You've already experienced so much personal growth, and yet this one person from your past keeps cropping up, disrupting your peace. It feels like your subconscious mind hasn't quite let go of the emotions tied to him, especially since it was a relationship where you felt like you cared more than he did. That imbalance of affection is something that can linger long after the relationship is over, and your dreams might be an expression of that imbalance. It could be your mind still processing the rejection or abandonment you felt, despite how much you've grown since then. Even if you've consciously let go of him and moved on in the real world, your mind might still be holding on to the emotional residue of the relationship, the hurt from him not treating you the way you deserved. Sometimes, the mind holds on to unresolved emotions without us even realizing it. The dreams might be a manifestation of that unresolved emotional baggage, even though on the surface, you've worked through it in your waking life. The emotional weight might not be entirely gone yet, and it might be showing up in ways that are hard to ignore. While this might sound discouraging, it's also important to note that your subconscious mind is processing and trying to integrate the emotions from that past relationship. The dreams, though distressing, might be your brain's way of trying to reconcile the feelings of rejection, hurt, and confusion that were left behind. In a sense, they are a natural part of the healing process, even if they don't feel that way. It's clear that you don't want to revisit that relationship, and you're right to acknowledge that in real life you're in a better place now. Your dreams are just that, dreams. They're not an indication that you want to get back together with him. They're a representation of lingering emotions that you might not have fully processed yet. That's why it's so important to focus on the deeper healing, the emotional processing, so that you can put the past to rest for good. In addition to the therapy and medication, there are some strategies that might help you take control of your dreams. If you haven't already, you might want to try dream journaling. This isn't necessarily about interpreting the dreams but rather writing them down as soon as you wake up. It can help release some of the emotional charge associated with them. You could also try focusing on what you want in your life now, reinforcing your desire for positive, healthy relationships, both with yourself and with others. Remind yourself of the boundaries you've set, of the love and respect you deserve, and of the strength you've built in your own life since then. Another option could be guided meditations before bed that focus on healing emotional trauma, letting go of the past, or even forgiveness, both of him and of yourself. Sometimes, taking control of your mindset before sleep can help set the stage for your subconscious to follow. If you've been doing these things but still feel stuck, it might be worth bringing them up again with your therapist to see if there's anything else that could help break this cycle. And remember, there's no shame in continuing to process this. Healing isn't linear. It's messy, unpredictable, and can take longer than you expect. The dreams will eventually stop, and in time, you'll be able to reflect on them as part of your past. Something that helped shape who you are today but no longer has the power to control you. For now, be kind to yourself. You're doing the hard work of healing and moving forward, and even though it doesn't always feel like it, each step you take is getting you closer to a future where these dreams no longer have the emotional weight they once did. You're stronger than you think. The dreams seem to be an almost cruel reminder of an unresolved chapter, one that you consciously left behind long ago but your subconscious mind hasn't quite processed yet. And I can only imagine how frustrating and disorienting it must be. On the one hand, you've worked hard to move on, built new relationships, found new joys, and made peace with who you are now. But on the other hand, your mind keeps replaying scenes from the past, keeping you tethered to something you no longer wish to be a part of. These repeated dreams of reconnection with your ex might also symbolize the part of you that is still craving closure. While the relationship may not have been the love of your life, there was a deep emotional investment, and when that connection was severed, you likely didn't have the opportunity to fully process what happened. Even though you've consciously let go, emotionally there might still be unresolved feelings. The way the breakup happened, the rumors, the betrayal, it left a mark even if it was only brief. Our brains often hold on to significant emotional moments, and relationships from our past can continue to trigger unresolved emotions, even years after they've ended. You mentioned that you were the one who broke up with him. That alone suggests there might be some guilt still lingering. Maybe a part of you feels like you didn't fully understand or process the emotions at the time of the breakup. Even though he was a bad partner, spreading rumors, disregarding you, and not treating you with the respect you deserved, there could still be a part of you that feels like the relationship should have worked. Your mind might be revisiting this, trying to sort through what went wrong, why it didn't work out, and maybe even wondering if there was something you missed or could have done differently. The fact that you're having dreams where you're getting back together with him suggests that, at least on some level, your subconscious mind might be replaying an idealized version of the relationship. It's a way to revisit it, but this time, perhaps to rewrite history and undo the wrongs that happened. You're reimagining a scenario where things are different, where you aren't hurt, where you didn't feel undervalued or betrayed. But the thing is, these dreams are built on an illusion. The real version of him, the one who treated you badly, spread rumors, and created unnecessary drama, doesn't match the version of him that appears in your dreams. These dreams are showing you what your mind wants: a relationship free of hurt, betrayal, and disappointment. It's a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that might be providing a temporary emotional release. The fact that you're aware of this is a good thing. You're conscious that these dreams aren't reflective of your current desires or intentions. You know better than to revisit that chapter of your life and try to rekindle something that was, at its core, unhealthy. But even with that knowledge, it's still so hard to break free of the emotional grip those dreams hold over you. It's not easy to undo years of emotions, especially when they come at you in the form of vivid dreams. It feels like your mind has taken a route you can't control, and that's frustrating because you want peace, not this cycle of revisiting old wounds. One possibility is that, in addition to closure, these dreams might be signaling a deeper need for self-forgiveness. You've been hard on yourself for how things ended with him. Maybe you feel as though you didn't deserve to be treated the way you were, or perhaps there's a lingering sense of guilt that you're carrying because you were the one to end the relationship. But the reality is, you made the decision to leave because it wasn't healthy. And while it's natural to question whether or not it was the right choice, the truth is, that breakup gave you the opportunity to grow. Without that break, you might not have experienced the personal growth and new relationships you have now. By constantly rehashing the past in your dreams, your subconscious mind may be searching for a way to release that guilt, to give yourself permission to forgive the younger version of you who made that difficult choice. It's possible that, on some level, you still carry some pain from the way the relationship ended, and the dreams are your brain's way of trying to heal that part of you. Maybe it's asking you to finally forgive yourself for choosing your own happiness over staying in a relationship that wasn't serving you. Even though you've moved on from him and made strides in your own life, you might still feel conflicted because you're trying to reconcile who you are now with who you were when that relationship ended. It's like you're trying to find balance between honoring your progress and accepting that there were parts of you that still needed healing back then. The dreams might be a reflection of that tug-of-war between your past and present selves. It's an emotional battle, one that can sometimes feel exhausting. The frustration of having tried medication and therapy to work through the dreams is understandable. It feels like you're trying every possible avenue to make them stop, but they persist, and that can feel disheartening. One approach could be to focus less on trying to make the dreams disappear and more on exploring the emotions they bring up. If you're able to tap into the emotional response these dreams create, you might start to notice patterns or recurring themes that are trying to show you something. For example, do the dreams reflect feelings of abandonment, guilt, or rejection? Are they replaying an emotional need that you have yet to fully process? Understanding the feelings behind the dreams might make it easier to manage them. When you feel the frustration rising, it might be helpful to ask yourself what emotions you're still holding onto from that time in your life, and how you can release them. Also, if the dreams are occurring every night, it's likely because your mind is trying to process something on a deeper level. You might not have fully processed the hurt from the breakup, the betrayal, or the way you were treated, and now your dreams are bringing those feelings to the surface. Recognizing this is an important step in your healing process. Even if the dreams don't stop immediately, each one could be bringing you closer to understanding what part of you still needs healing. The more you confront these feelings, the more you can begin to release them. Another option could be to reframe the meaning of the dreams. Instead of seeing them as a sign that you want to get back together, maybe you can think of them as an opportunity for closure. You have the power to take control of the narrative in your waking life by reminding yourself that you made the right decision to end the relationship and that it was a step toward a healthier future. It might not be easy and it might not be quick, but over time, as you continue to work through the emotions tied to these dreams, you'll gradually start to feel less and less connected to them. They'll become distant memories, just a part of your past that no longer has any emotional power over you. It's clear from what you've shared that the dreams about your ex are more than just random occurrences. They represent something deeper in your subconscious. They're not simply about him. They're about unresolved feelings from your past and the emotional baggage that has yet to be fully unpacked. And while you've made so much progress in your life, especially in the years since the breakup, the lingering presence of these dreams can make it feel like you're still stuck in a cycle that you can't break. But recognizing that these dreams are a manifestation of something deeper is the first step in truly understanding what needs healing. What might be at play here is the idea of emotional residue, the feelings that you didn't fully process at the time of the breakup. When we go through a tough experience, especially a breakup, there are a lot of emotions that we don't always allow ourselves to feel completely. Whether it's anger, sadness, guilt, or even a sense of failure, these emotions can linger. In your case, it seems like there may have been a mix of disappointment, hurt, and confusion. You ended things with your ex, but there were a lot of unanswered questions, both about him and about yourself. Perhaps, in the back of your mind, you've never fully accepted why it ended the way it did or why things played out the way they did, especially with the rumors he spread about you. The fact that these dreams continue after 6 years is a testament to how unresolved these feelings might be. Your subconscious doesn't let go easily. It holds on to these moments, even if they don't seem significant on the surface. In your waking life, you may have moved on, maybe even entered new relationships, found new passions, and created a new identity. But emotionally, your past relationship and the way it ended could still be tied to some core beliefs about yourself. These dreams are your mind's attempt to revisit the past and process what you may not have been able to fully address when you were younger. What's intriguing about these dreams is that they're not just about him, they're about the emotional imprint he left on you. It's less about wanting to get back together with your ex, and more about your mind trying to make sense of the past and integrate it into your present self. This kind of processing happens often in dreams when there's a significant emotional event or unresolved issue. Your ex, in these dreams, might represent a part of yourself that you haven't fully reconciled with. Perhaps, deep down, you still feel a sense of loss or unfinished business. It's as if your mind is replaying the relationship in a way that helps you address whatever emotional need was left unmet. One thing to consider is that, even though you consciously want to move on, a part of you might still be looking for closure. Your ex may have been a catalyst for certain emotional lessons in your life, and your mind may be trying to process those lessons through the repetition of these dreams. What might help is reframing the dreams as an opportunity for personal growth rather than something that's dragging you back into the past. When you dream about your ex, instead of simply feeling frustration or longing, try to shift your perspective to wonder what these dreams are trying to teach you. Are they reminding you of how strong you are now compared to when you were with him? Are they showing you how far you've come since then, and how much you've learned about yourself and what you need in relationships? It might also be helpful to think about what you still need to forgive, both your ex and yourself. While it's easy to focus on his actions, the pain you're feeling now might have more to do with the way you've internalized the events of the past. Did you forgive yourself for the role you played in the relationship? Did you forgive yourself for ending things, even though you knew it was the right decision at the time? We often carry guilt, even when we've made the right choice, because we're taught to believe that ending a relationship means we failed somehow. But the truth is, you did the right thing by leaving a relationship that wasn't serving you. One of the reasons these dreams continue is that, on some level, there's still a part of you that needs to be freed from the past. Your subconscious is trying to work through unresolved feelings, but it's also trying to show you that your ex doesn't hold the power over you that you might think. By understanding the role these dreams play in your emotional healing, you can start to release the grip they have on your mind. You might not be able to stop the dreams completely right away, but by exploring the emotions behind them and learning to forgive, you might start to see them in a new light. You mentioned that you've tried therapy and medication to help manage these dreams, and it's understandable to feel frustrated when it seems like those methods aren't providing the relief you hoped for. The truth is, sometimes the therapeutic process can take time, and the solution might not be in erasing the dreams altogether, but rather in shifting your emotional reaction to them. It could be that your brain is holding on to these dreams because it needs to process something before it can fully let go. And the more you actively work through these emotions in therapy, the more you'll begin to see progress, even if it's gradual. In the meantime, there are other things you can do to help manage the dreams when they arise. For example, grounding techniques before bed can help calm your mind and prepare you for a restful night's sleep. Practices like deep breathing, meditation, or journaling can help you clear your mind before you close your eyes. If your mind starts to wander to your ex or to the dreams about getting back together, try redirecting your thoughts to something positive. You might even try visualizing a peaceful place or a scenario where you're in control of the situation, instead of letting the dreams take over. Reframing your sleep environment by making it more peaceful or comforting might also help ease the anxiety you feel about these dreams. Another important aspect is to recognize that you're not alone in this. Many people experience recurring dreams about ex-partners, and it doesn't necessarily mean you want to get back with them. It's simply a sign that there are still some emotional layers to peel back, some things that need to be processed. And while it can feel overwhelming at times, the fact that you're aware of the issue and actively seeking solutions shows how much progress you've already made. Keep in mind that healing, especially from past relationships, isn't linear. There will be setbacks and there will be moments where it feels like you're back in the same place. But with time, and by continuing to explore the root of these dreams, you'll eventually come to a place of understanding and release. Navigating these dreams, it's important to remember that your journey isn't just about trying to forget your ex or erase the past. It's about fully understanding the emotional impact that the relationship had on you and how it's shaped who you are today. The fact that these dreams have persisted for 6 years speaks volumes about how deeply they are woven into your emotional fabric. While these dreams can feel frustrating and intrusive, they can also serve as a guide to deeper parts of your psyche that are in need of attention and healing. The fact that you've been able to recognize the patterns of these dreams, that they aren't just random but are tied to unresolved feelings, shows a level of self-awareness that many people never reach. It's this kind of insight that will allow you to better understand why they keep coming back. Dreams are often the unconscious mind's way of processing emotional baggage that you haven't yet fully dealt with. And while you may consciously believe that you've moved on, there may still be fragments of the past that you've yet to fully confront. One possible reason these dreams keep resurfacing is because of the emotional imbalance you felt during the relationship. You mentioned that your ex didn't give you the time of day, which left you feeling unimportant and undervalued. The fact that you broke up with him could have created a sense of unresolved emotional tension. Maybe, deep down, there's a part of you that feels guilty for ending the relationship, or perhaps there's a part of you that wishes things had gone differently, even though you know logically it was the right decision at the time. It's possible that your subconscious keeps revisiting the relationship because there are still unprocessed feelings tied to your self-worth, or maybe it's trying to find closure on how things ended. And because your ex didn't acknowledge your feelings during the relationship, there may still be an emotional echo that's left behind, something that lingers despite the passage of time. The repetition of these dreams, as frustrating as it may be, could be your mind's attempt to get closure. But in order to process these dreams more effectively, you need to consider what your subconscious is trying to communicate. If your mind is still revisiting the same emotions from the past, it's likely that there's some part of your emotional world that still feels unresolved. Perhaps you've moved on from him, but you haven't fully let go of the emotional weight that the relationship left behind. Maybe it wasn't just the breakup itself but the way it unfolded, the lies he told, and the way you felt dismissed by him. In therapy, you've already done a lot of good work to understand and process your feelings, but this kind of persistent emotional residue may require a different approach to healing. Since the dreams have been recurring for years, you might want to delve even deeper into the root of your emotions surrounding the relationship. Reflecting on what the relationship taught you, how it shaped your view of yourself, and what lessons you've learned could help you better understand why it continues to have such a strong hold on your subconscious. One way to approach this is through journaling. Writing down your thoughts and feelings, especially those that come up when you have these dreams, can help release some of the built-up tension. In your journal, you might explore questions like, what unresolved feelings or needs do I still carry from this relationship? How did this relationship affect my sense of self-worth? Do I still feel like there's something I didn't get to express or understand fully? What have I learned about myself and my needs in relationships since then? What does closure look like for me? These reflections can help you uncover deeper insights into why the dreams are persistent and what they may be trying to teach you. Over time, as you process these questions, you may find that the emotional intensity surrounding the relationship begins to diminish. The dreams may start to feel less vivid and intrusive, and eventually they might fade altogether. Another step in this process is shifting your relationship with the memories of the past. It might be helpful to practice mindfulness techniques that allow you to stay present in your current life and prevent the past from taking over. For example, when you have these dreams, instead of dwelling on them or letting them affect your day, try grounding yourself in the present moment. You can do this by focusing on your breath, using positive affirmations, or even engaging in a sensory activity that reminds you of your life now, such as savoring a cup of coffee, taking a walk, or practicing gratitude for where you are today. As you've already learned, the mind doesn't always cooperate with your intentions. You can't just will away the dreams or stop them from happening. But what you can do is change the way you respond to them. When you wake up from a dream about your ex, acknowledge the feeling, but don't allow it to hijack your entire day. Instead of spiraling into negative thoughts about him or the past, remind yourself that this is just a dream, one of many, and that it doesn't define who you are or what your future holds. The more you practice this kind of mindfulness, the easier it will become to detach from the emotional weight these dreams carry. Another thing to consider is focusing on building your own sense of self-love and self-worth outside of your past relationships. Many people find themselves carrying remnants of old relationships because they didn't fully internalize their own value. If you've spent years being affected by the past relationship, it may be a sign that you haven't fully acknowledged how strong and valuable you are on your own. Taking time for self-care, engaging in activities that make you feel good about yourself, and surrounding yourself with people who value and appreciate you can help reinforce a positive sense of self-worth. It's also important to remember that healing takes time, and you're already doing the work. Therapy, self-reflection, and learning how to navigate the impact of these dreams are all part of the process. You're not broken because you're still having these dreams, and you're not alone in experiencing them. The fact that you're aware of them and want to heal is a huge step in the right direction. In the end, you will continue to grow, and over time, the weight of these dreams will lessen. They may always be a part of your story, but they don't have to control your present or future. They're simply part of a larger journey of understanding yourself and coming to terms with the past. With each step you take toward healing, you're closer to finding the peace and closure that you deserve. It's important to recognize that personal growth isn't linear. There will be moments when you feel like you've taken huge strides, and then there might be times when you feel like you're back at square one, especially when the dreams resurface or when the feelings tied to your past relationship seem to bubble up again. These ups and downs are part of the process. It's normal to have setbacks, but each time you encounter them, you are gaining more insight and strength. One thing that can be helpful as you continue your work in therapy is exploring the deeper layers of your past relationships. While it's clear that this particular ex has had a lingering impact on you, it's also possible that previous experiences have played a role in how you view yourself and how you approach healing. Your ex may have been a key figure in your emotional landscape, but he might not be the sole reason you're struggling with these recurring dreams. In therapy, exploring patterns in your relationships, even those before and after your ex, can help uncover root causes of unresolved emotions. You might begin to see that there are common threads, whether it's feeling undervalued, unappreciated, or abandoned, that are contributing to your current emotional state. Recognizing these patterns is one of the first steps in breaking them. Another avenue worth exploring is the concept of forgiveness, both of yourself and of your ex. It's understandable to feel frustrated with your past self, especially when looking back on actions you took, or didn't take, that may have led to regret. But part of the healing process involves being kind to yourself, offering yourself compassion for the mistakes you made, and understanding that you were doing the best you could at the time with the knowledge and resources you had. The same goes for your ex. Though he may have hurt you or made you feel disrespected, holding on to anger or resentment can keep you tethered to the past and prolong the emotional baggage. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing his actions or forgetting what happened, but rather letting go of the grip those emotions have on you. In addition to therapy, one of the best ways to help release the emotional hold that these dreams have on you is to actively engage in your present life. Reconnect with the things that bring you joy, that make you feel alive. Find hobbies, passions, or activities that make you feel fulfilled, independent, and strong. When we invest in ourselves and build a life that brings us fulfillment, we naturally start to shift our focus away from the past and toward the future. Engage in new experiences that challenge you, whether it's traveling, learning something new, or meeting new people. By stepping outside of your comfort zone and creating new memories, you not only reaffirm your sense of self but also send a signal to your subconscious mind that your life is dynamic, constantly evolving, and not limited by what happened in the past. Every new step forward is one more step away from the person and situation that no longer serve you. It's also essential to be patient with yourself. Healing from deep emotional scars takes time, and there are no shortcuts. You may not be able to eliminate the dreams immediately, but with consistent effort, they'll gradually lose their power over you. In time, the dreams may become less frequent, and when they do occur, they may no longer carry the emotional weight they once did. They'll just be dreams, a reminder of something you've already processed and moved beyond. The fact that you are actively engaging in this journey of self-awareness and healing is something to be proud of. You are facing the discomfort, the emotional wounds, and the unresolved feelings with courage. And each time you face one of these challenges, you're growing and evolving into someone who is even stronger and more at peace with themselves. Lastly, never underestimate the importance of support from others. Friends, family, and a good therapist can provide invaluable perspectives and encouragement. Don't be afraid to lean on those who care about you when you're struggling. While the path to healing is yours to walk, you don't have to walk it alone. There are people who want to help, who want to see you thrive, and who will remind you of your worth when you need it most. Ultimately, you will find peace. The dreams, though persistent now, will become less of a burden. Your subconscious is simply trying to help you process your emotions, and in time, the need for those dreams will lessen. The past will remain a part of your story, but it won't define you. Your future is full of possibilities, and the more you focus on embracing those possibilities, the more your past will settle into its rightful place. You've already done so much work to understand yourself and your emotions. Trust in the process and keep moving forward with the confidence that you are on the path to healing and peace. The future is yours and it's bright. My autistic life in a nutshell. I was born in Derby, UK in 1986, and my life has been profoundly shaped by my experiences as an autistic person. Growing up, I quickly learned that my brain worked differently from others around me, though I didn't have the words to describe it at first. I was diagnosed with high-functioning autism, which means that while I don't have an intellectual disability, my mind processes information, social cues, and emotions in ways that set me apart. From a young age, I faced challenges in understanding certain social norms and often felt misunderstood. Small, everyday things that came easily to others, like making friends, reading people's facial expressions, or adapting to new routines, felt like monumental tasks for me. One of the earliest challenges I faced was with my education. Despite living in Derby, Derby City Council couldn't find a suitable local school placement for me. This was disheartening because it meant I wouldn't be able to go to school with other kids in my community, form connections, or feel a sense of belonging. Instead, every day I was sent to a school in Nottingham by taxi. At the time, I didn't fully understand why I was being separated from my peers or why my local area couldn't provide the support I needed. The daily taxi rides were long and lonely, and as a child, it felt strange to be shuttled between cities like this, as if my needs were a problem that Derby couldn't address. The school in Nottingham did what it could, but it wasn't adequately prepared to support kids with autism, especially those like me who have high-functioning autism. I often felt out of place, misunderstood, and neglected. The teachers and staff, while kind, lacked the specialized knowledge and training to fully meet my needs. I missed out on the structured, supportive education I could have had if more resources were available. As a result, there are gaps in my academic knowledge and, perhaps more importantly, gaps in my social experience. I wasn't able to engage in extracurricular activities, sports, or school clubs, all of which are crucial for building confidence and friendships. Watching other children make friends and participate in activities I couldn't join was incredibly isolating. These early experiences left a lasting impact on me. I became used to being on the outside looking in, developing a sense of independence but also a sense of loneliness. Throughout my adolescence, I found it difficult to relate to my peers and struggled with social interactions. Many people didn't understand what it meant to be autistic, and I often faced misunderstandings and prejudice. People sometimes assumed that because I processed information differently, I was uninterested in connecting or was unkind, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Inside, I had the same hopes and dreams as anyone else. I longed for acceptance, friendship, and understanding but felt limited by both the way others perceived me and my own ability to communicate. After my schooling years, I moved to Sutton in Ashfield, near Mansfield, hoping that a change in scenery might bring new opportunities. I spent 13 years in this area trying to find stability and purpose. During this time I got married, which was a significant milestone for me. Marriage brought companionship, and for a while, I felt like I'd found a place where I belonged. But as the years went by, the challenges of maintaining a close relationship while managing the complexities of autism became apparent. My partner and I had our differences, and while we tried to make it work, our lives eventually drifted apart. Navigating the emotional roller coaster of a marriage and eventually, a divorce, was one of the hardest experiences of my life. For me, change has always been especially difficult due to my autism, and losing the sense of stability that marriage provided was devastating. Following my divorce, I decided to move back to Derby. Returning to my hometown was a complicated decision. On one hand, Derby represented a fresh start, a chance to reconnect with my roots and perhaps build a new life on familiar ground. On the other hand, it brought up memories of my early struggles with education and the feeling of being left behind. Despite these mixed emotions, I was determined to create a life that would allow me to embrace my differences and perhaps, for the first time, find true belonging. Since moving back to Derby, I've been on a journey of self-discovery and self-acceptance. I've sought out support groups, connected with other adults on the autism spectrum, and learned more about autism advocacy. I'm proud to be part of a community of people who understand my experiences and who face similar challenges. It's comforting to know that I'm not alone in my journey and that there are others who have walked similar paths. I'm also becoming more comfortable in explaining my needs to others, which has led to more meaningful relationships and understanding with friends and colleagues. Living with autism has taught me resilience and given me a unique perspective on life. I've come to appreciate the ways in which my mind works differently. While it can be a struggle, it also allows me to notice details and patterns others might miss, to think deeply, and to value authenticity and honesty. Though I still face challenges, I'm learning to see them as part of who I am and to advocate for myself in a world that doesn't always understand. Looking to the future, I'm hopeful. I want to continue connecting with others, both in the autism community and beyond, and to share my experiences in ways that might help others understand what life is like for people like me. My life has been shaped by both the struggles and strengths of living with autism, and I'm proud of the journey I've traveled. For anyone else out there feeling alone, I hope my story can be a reminder that they're not alone, and that acceptance and understanding are possible, even if the journey to find them is a long one. When I moved back to Derby after my divorce, I was hopeful that it would be a fresh start. I found a place in Alveston, a flat that I thought would be the beginning of a new chapter. But life had other plans, and what happened there was a chapter one never anticipated. The trouble started when I realized that my upstairs neighbor had set up a full-scale cannabis farm in his one-bedroom flat. We're not talking about a small operation either. This was a full-blown grow house with over 200 cannabis plants packed into that small space. The setup was far from safe or professional, it was dangerous. They'd tampered with the plumbing to create an irrigation system for the plants, and it wasn't long before my flat began to suffer the consequences. I woke up multiple times to water seeping through my ceiling, damaging my walls and furniture. It was incredibly frustrating and disheartening. Here I was trying to rebuild my life and I found myself dealing with floods caused by someone else's reckless choices. On top of that, they had messed with the mains electricity, creating a potentially lethal situation for everyone in the building. My electricity supply was compromised as a result of their tampering, and it made me anxious, knowing that such a hazardous setup was just upstairs. I had no control over this situation and I felt trapped, waiting for something terrible to happen. The knowledge that a spark or short circuit could lead to a fire was a constant source of worry. I'd moved here to feel safe and stable, yet the risk of an electrical fire loomed over me every day. It wasn't just the cannabis farm and its hazards that made life difficult. The neighbor himself started to harass me over trivial things, like the placement of our shared wheelie bins. The irony of it all didn't escape me. I was dealing with flooding and electrical risks due to his cannabis operation, and yet he was fixated on something as mundane as bin placement. His hostility added an extra layer of stress, and I felt incredibly isolated. This was supposed to be my home, my sanctuary, and yet I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next flood, the next confrontation, the next time I'd have to worry about the risks this man's choices imposed on me. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and the police raided his flat. I remember the day they came in. It was a strange mix of relief and tension. Knowing that the operation was finally going to be shut down gave me a sense of justice, yet at the same time, I knew this was just the beginning of sorting out the mess left behind. The cannabis farm was dismantled, and he was taken away to face the consequences of his actions. But even after the raid, I couldn't shake the feeling of empathy for him. I knew I had every reason to be angry, to hold on to my resentment and frustration, but that's not who I am. I try to see the best in people even when they've wronged me. So, eventually, I found an opportunity to speak to him and we had an honest conversation. As we talked, I realized that he'd had a hard life and I suspected that he may have been cuckooed, a term for when someone vulnerable is exploited by others who use their property for illegal activities. It seemed likely that he'd been pressured or manipulated into allowing others to use his flat for the cannabis operation. I chose to forgive him. I told him that it wasn't up to me to judge or prosecute him. That was the job of the police and the courts. At the end of the day, I wasn't there to add to his suffering. I could see that he was, in some ways, a victim himself, caught up in a situation that may have been out of his control. While I couldn't condone what he'd done or the impact it had on my life, I chose to let go of my resentment. In hindsight, this experience taught me a lot about resilience and forgiveness. It reminded me that life can throw unexpected challenges at us, and sometimes all we can do is choose how we respond. I could have let anger consume me, but instead, I chose understanding and compassion. Moving back to Derby was meant to be a fresh start, and while this experience was far from ideal, it reaffirmed my values and strengthened my sense of empathy. I'm still working towards finding peace and stability in my life, but I'm proud of how I handled this situation and of my ability to look beyond my own frustrations to see the humanity in someone else's story. Sometimes life throws us into situations that are almost surreal. It's not uncommon for people to find themselves entangled in a web of addiction and debt, particularly when they get involved in drugs. I know firsthand how insidious these traps can be and how easily one could fall into them. I used to smoke weed regularly, more than just casually. At one point, I was almost constantly high using weed, hash, and edibles. Some of it was fun. I'd take my dog to the park and go UFO spotting, having long conversations with her about space, aliens, and life on other planets. It was like the world became a playground for my imagination, and I found myself being incredibly creative, especially in games like The Sims and Minecraft, where I could build whole worlds. But there was a darker side too. The more I smoked, the more detached from reality I became. It started affecting my mental health in ways I never expected. I began to hallucinate and hear voices, which was terrifying and isolating. My sleep patterns were completely disrupted, and I would go for days without getting any proper rest. This led to constant meltdowns, and I felt like I was losing control over my mind and my life. I realized I was on the edge of a psychotic break. It was a scary realization, and it made me confront the truth. While weed had been a source of temporary escape, it was also destroying my mental health. Eventually, I made the decision to stop. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way to regain stability and peace of mind. I still have the occasional puff, but since Christmas 2023, I haven't smoked regularly, and I feel more in control of myself now. After dealing with the challenges in Alveston, I decided to move into a sheltered housing area, hoping it would offer me a more stable and supportive environment. Unfortunately, sheltered turned out to be anything but. Almost immediately, I encountered major issues with my downstairs neighbor. One of the biggest problems has been the constant infiltration of his cigarette smoke into my flat. I've suffered from asthma since I was young, but the exposure to secondhand smoke has made it far worse. The episodes of asthma triggered by the smoke have been severe and relentless, and it's taken a massive toll on my physical and mental health. I used to be a more outgoing person, but these constant asthma attacks and the stress they bring have changed me. Now I rarely go out. My social circle has shrunk to just my dog and my mum, and I find it hard to trust anyone outside of them. The person I used to be, someone open and curious, is harder to find these days. The issues with my neighbor haven't stopped at secondhand smoke either. He's verbally aggressive and has shouted and sworn at me on multiple occasions. He's even accused me of being racist. Ironically, my mother's side of the family is Slovakian just like him, so the accusation felt bizarre and unwarranted. I come from a Jewish background, and many of my ancestors were murdered in the Holocaust. I am deeply aware of the horrors of racism and prejudice, and I am the last person who would discriminate against anyone based on their nationality, skin color, or background. When I meet someone, the first thing I see is a human being, not a set of labels. I don't care about those surface differences. To me, they don't mean a thing. Beyond the struggles with my neighbor, my health has taken a turn for the worse. Because of the severity of my asthma attacks, my doctor increased my dose of steroid inhalers to help manage the symptoms. But this higher dosage came with its own consequences. After a while, I began to experience unusual symptoms, and after some tests, doctors suspect that I might have adrenal insufficiency, which is essentially Addison's disease. Addison's is a condition where the adrenal glands don't produce enough hormones, and it can be life-threatening if not managed carefully. My doctors believe it could be genetic, but I feel that the high doses of steroids in my inhalers might have triggered or worsened it, tipping my body over the edge. The journey to get an official diagnosis has been frustrating and complex. One crucial test, called the synacthin test, is needed to confirm adrenal insufficiency. To prepare for this test, I have to stop using my inhaler for 48 hours beforehand. But this is where things get complicated. I tried to do this last month, but just before the test, my neighbor's visitors flooded his flat with cigarette smoke, triggering another severe asthma attack. I couldn't breathe properly, let alone go through with the test. It was a massive setback, one that left me feeling helpless and defeated. My health feels like it's hanging by a thread, and these constant disruptions make it hard to take control of my condition. I've finally managed to schedule another synacthin test for later this month. This time, I'm determined to go through with it no matter what. I know there are risks and I know it's going to be challenging, but I need answers. Living in a state of constant uncertainty about my health is exhausting, and I need to know what's going on with my body so I can manage it as best I can. Reflecting on all of this, I sometimes feel like life has been a series of battles, one after the other. Between the struggles with addiction, the physical toll of asthma, the aggression from neighbors, and now the uncertainty of a possible Addison's diagnosis, I feel like I've been pushed to my limits. But through it all, I'm still here, still fighting, and still trying to build a life that feels meaningful and true to who I am. Despite the isolation, the setbacks, and the health scares, I refuse to give up. I'm holding on to hope, and I'm determined to find a way through this, one step at a time. It's hard to put into words the impact that my health issues have had on my life, especially when the pain feels never-ending. I've been dealing with severe sciatica in my right leg, caused by a mild disc bulge in my lower back. Doctors often tell me that it's not that serious as disc injuries go, and I know they mean well. But when you're the one living with searing red-hot pain day after day, it's hard not to feel dismissed or overlooked. Every step I take sends shooting pain down my leg, making even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Sometimes I can barely make it around the local park. I used to love taking my dog, Beauty, on long, scenic walks, exploring trails and spending time outdoors, but now those days are just memories. Now, I'm lucky if I can make it across the street and it feels like my world is closing in. The sciatica isn't just physically painful. It's a daily reminder of my limitations, and that mental burden is taking a toll. There have been times when the pain struck so suddenly in public places that I nearly collapsed. I'll be in the supermarket just trying to get groceries when the pain overwhelms me, forcing me to stop, squat, and just breathe through it. The unpredictability of it all is exhausting, and I feel helpless, wondering how much longer I can go on like this. My GP wants me to go in for another MRI scan, which could potentially help identify the next steps for treatment. But there's another layer to this struggle: my claustrophobia. The breathing problems I've developed over the years have made the idea of being in a closed MRI machine unbearable. I don't want to waste an expensive appointment that someone else could use, but I also feel trapped in this cycle of fear and avoidance. The NHS is already stretched thin, and I feel guilty adding my own struggles to an overwhelmed system. Still, the pain isn't going away on its own, and every day, it chips away at my mental resilience. To complicate things even further, I recently learned that my mother, sister, and I carry the BRCA2 gene mutation. The implications of this discovery have weighed heavily on me, especially since my dad passed away from cancer. Knowing that I have this heightened risk feels like a ticking clock in the back of my mind, and it's hard to keep that anxiety at bay. Part of the protocol for BRCA2 carriers is to undergo regular breast screenings, but the recommended MRI scan triggers my claustrophobia all over again. I've tried to explain my anxiety to doctors, but they didn't seem to fully grasp how intense it is, and I feel like I'm failing my dad by missing these vital screenings. I know how crucial they are, and it scares me to think I might be neglecting my health, but the fear is so overwhelming that I haven't been able to follow through. Despite these struggles, there's one constant in my life that brings me comfort and joy: my rescue dog, Beauty. She's a gentle, loyal, mixed-breed dog, part Mastiff, with possibly a bit of Staffy or Labrador in her. Beauty has been my anchor, my loyal companion through all the ups and downs. Her temperament with people is incredible. It's like she knows when someone needs a little extra kindness. She's especially gentle with children and those who are frail or vulnerable. There have been so many special moments with her, like the time a little boy who'd been bitten by a dog bravely worked up the courage to pet her. Seeing his mom tear up was a powerful reminder of the healing impact Beauty has on those around her. She may not be the best with other dogs, so we avoid them, but with people she's a natural. Beauty has a calming presence, and she seems to sense when I'm struggling, always there to offer silent support. At 13, I know her time with me is limited, and that thought is hard to bear. I can't imagine a world without her, but I know that's just part of the natural order of things. Still, Beauty is my world, my constant companion, and I often think of her as a mirror for the qualities I need to cultivate in myself. She's resilient, stoic, and kind, a reflection of the person I strive to be, even on days when my challenges seem overwhelming. This is just a small part of my story, a glimpse into what life has been like with autism, chronic pain, and health challenges. There's so much more I could share, and sometimes I think about putting it all down in a book, a way to give voice to the experiences and struggles that people like me go through. I hope that by sharing this, even in a small way, someone else on the spectrum might read it and know they're not alone. Life with autism and chronic pain isn't easy, and sometimes it feels like the world doesn't understand, but there is resilience to be found in each of us. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that resilience, no matter how battered it might feel, can get us through more than we think possible. Aita for posting receipts to family FB group that I didn't steal $26,000? The relationship with my mother has been a difficult one for as long as I can remember. Her controlling and demanding nature has created tension between us throughout our lives, and there have been times where she has completely cut me off, sometimes for years. I've lost count of the times that we've had fallouts over things like not calling her according to her strict, unspoken schedule, or failing to follow through with her ever-changing expectations. But no matter how many times I told myself I could live without her approval, I've always found myself being pulled back in by that thread of hope that maybe, this time, things would be different. Maybe finally she'd see my loyalty and care for what it truly is. In early 2023, my mother's health took a severe turn for the worse, and she was rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. She's the legal guardian of my 40-year-old nephew, who is both physically and mentally disabled and depends on others for nearly all his care. Despite everything, my husband and I didn't hesitate to drop everything and drive the 3 hours to her home in another state. We didn't just come for a quick visit or a check-in, we stayed. For nearly 4 months, we lived in her house, taking care of everything she left behind. We maintained her home, paid her bills, and looked after my nephew, doing everything from bathing him to feeding him, all while my husband took time daily to visit her in the hospital, ensuring she had everything she needed. The level of care we provided wasn't small. My husband made sure she had fresh clothes for physical therapy, toiletries, and anything else she might need while in recovery. She called me from the hospital multiple times a day to chat and, more often, to issue orders about things that needed to be done at the house. I did it all without question, feeling like maybe this act of service, this devotion, would finally show her that I cared deeply, that she could count on me. However, when she finally returned home, it felt like we had stepped into a nightmare. Instead of showing gratitude or even acknowledging the sacrifices we'd made, she became cold and accusatory, treating us like hired help at best. The caregiver I'd hired to help with her transition home, a woman who'd known my mother previously, only made things worse. She saw an opportunity and started manipulating my mother, planting seeds of doubt and turning her against us. She convinced my mother that we were trying to put her in a nursing home, painting us as scheming and untrustworthy. The result? A huge fight broke out when my mother started throwing accusations at us, insisting that we hadn't been feeding her properly, that we were withholding her medications, and even going so far as to say we were trying to harm her. After everything we'd done, after months of dedicated care, to hear her say those things was shattering. I knew she wasn't fully herself and that her health issues, especially her wildly fluctuating blood sugar, might have been affecting her mind. But it didn't make the pain of her words any less devastating. Leaving her house, I tried to tell myself that it was time to accept life without my mother in it. We'd been down this road before and it never ended well. I was ready to move on, but that peace was short-lived. I had been on my mother's checking and savings accounts since my dad passed away in 2008. Despite having access for over a decade, I had never touched her money, never taken a single cent that wasn't directly used for her benefit. During our stay, we used her funds strictly for household bills, groceries, and essentials, all with her knowledge and consent. But soon after I left, I checked her account online to make sure everything was still in order, only to see transactions I didn't recognize. The caregiver had been cash apping herself money almost daily, making ATM withdrawals and charging my mom's debit card for who knows what. I reached out to the caregiver, telling her that she needed to keep a timesheet and have my mom write her checks so there would be a record of her pay. She blocked me immediately. Then 2 weeks later, a classmate of mine who happened to be related to the caregiver by marriage called me out of the blue. She told me that the caregiver had been boasting about her plans to get control of my mother's assets. That morning, the caregiver had taken my mother to an attorney to get power of attorney, with the intention of gaining access to her property and finances. I tried to intervene, even calling the attorney's office to explain my concerns, but he wouldn't take or return my calls. In no time at all, the caregiver had full power of attorney and took my mother directly to the bank, draining both her checking and savings accounts. I was horrified, heartbroken, and furious. I went to the police in the bank, explaining everything, hoping they'd see what was happening, but because my mother could still carry on a conversation, they assumed she was of sound mind and dismissed my concerns. She was 83, vulnerable, and clearly not making rational decisions, but no one was willing to help. In a last-ditch effort, I hired an attorney to try for guardianship, but my mother's 2 sisters, who had initially promised to support me, backed out. They had spent the past year urging me to consider a nursing home for my mother, but when it came time to stand by me in court, they couldn't do it. After that, I tried to make peace with the situation, convincing myself that I would just have to fight for my inheritance after my mother passed. But then, another blow came. My aunt called to tell me that my mother was telling people in town that I had stolen $26,000 from her. She heard it from the local pharmacist. My own mother was spreading rumors that I had taken her money, despite everything I had done for her. The hurt was almost too much to bear, but I couldn't bring myself to sue her for defamation. Instead, I decided to set the record straight in the private family Facebook group that I created and moderate. I posted copies of her bank statements showing the balance from when I arrived and when I left, proving that the money was untouched. I also included screenshots of the dozens of transactions made by the caregiver, showing exactly where the money had gone. My goal was simple: to clear my name among family members who might have been swayed by her false accusations. Not everyone understood why I did it. My cousin messaged me, saying that I shouldn't have aired our family drama in the group, suggesting that many family members probably didn't even know about it. But I told her that even if they hadn't heard every detail, our family gossips enough that they would have heard something. I wanted everyone to know the truth, to see the proof that I hadn't taken a cent of my mother's money despite all the opportunity to do so. This experience has left me grappling with a deep mix of emotions: hurt, betrayal, and a sense of closure that I've struggled to accept. My husband and I dedicated months of our lives to caring for my mother, managing her household, and looking after my nephew without any expectation of repayment. We replaced smoke detectors, installed safety rails, and bought a new recliner when hers broke, always with her approval and always out of love. The things we did went beyond obligation. They were acts of devotion and respect for family. But in the end, it feels like none of it mattered. This is just one part of my story with my mother, a complex relationship that has been marked by hardship, duty, and ultimately painful decisions. Despite everything, I don't regret what I did. I know I acted out of love and integrity, and although I may never get my mother's understanding or approval, I can live with myself, knowing that I stayed true to my values and gave her the best care I could. After setting the record straight in our family Facebook group, I tried to move forward with my life. I focused on my own family, on the peace I could control, and on accepting that my mother would likely never see things the way I did. But moving on hasn't been easy. The family dynamics remain complicated, and my mother's influence still looms large over my relationships with other relatives. Some family members stayed neutral, while others began to keep their distance, unsure of where they stood or hesitant to take sides. I get it, no one wants to be in the middle of a painful family drama, and the situation with my mother has a way of making people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the caregiver my mother entrusted with her finances has continued to manipulate her, further isolating her from anyone who might challenge her control. My mother seems convinced that this person is the only one who truly cares about her, even as she siphons money from her accounts and convinces her to make poor financial decisions. I've accepted that there's little I can do without the backing of others to contest my mother's capacity to make decisions. The heartbreak lies in knowing that she's surrounded by people who either don't see what's happening or aren't willing to intervene. My husband, who witnessed every moment of this ordeal, has been a constant source of strength. We've talked many nights about the toll this has taken on me, on us, and on our future. He feels the same hurt and betrayal as I do but has been unwavering in his belief that we did everything we could. I've leaned on him and close friends for emotional support, which has made me realize how important it is to build a chosen family of people who uplift you and understand you. It's a stark contrast to the feeling of obligation I've always felt with my mother, who gave birth to me but, over time, never provided the love or support I longed for. Still, I find myself questioning things. Did I go too far by posting in the family group? Was there a better way to handle my mother's accusations? And most of all, will I ever be able to truly let go of the pain and resentment that her actions have caused me over the years? Therapy has been a consideration. I think it would help me process everything, to talk through the hurt and the unresolved issues I have. I want to learn how to set boundaries that I can stick to, even when guilt or fear of judgment seeps in. I've also been spending time with my nephew, who is perhaps the most innocent party in this entire mess. Despite his disabilities, he has an incredible spirit, and he brings light into my life in a way that few others can. It's bittersweet because he's tied to my mother, and I worry about what will happen to him under the caregiver's influence. I feel a strong duty to look after him, but I'm aware of my limitations. Without legal authority, my hands are tied, and it pains me to think of the life he's leading without the proper care and stability he deserves. As the months have gone by, I've begun to focus more on cultivating peace in my own life. I'm learning that it's okay to create distance from people, even family, who bring negativity or harm into your life. This isn't something I ever thought I'd have to do with my own mother, but I now understand that family doesn't always mean unconditional loyalty. Sometimes taking care of yourself means making the hard choice to walk away from those who hurt you, even if they're the ones who are supposed to love you the most. This journey has also helped me rediscover what's important to me. Love, kindness, respect, and honesty. These are the qualities I want to fill my life with, and I'm determined to give them to others, even if I didn't always receive them myself. I'm working on forgiveness, though it's hard. Not for my mother's sake, but for my own. Holding on to anger and resentment only weighs me down, and I know that letting go, truly letting go, is the only way I'll be able to move on and build the future I deserve. In the end, this experience has changed me. I'm not the same person I was before, but I believe that's okay. It's helped me see the strength I didn't know I had and taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. I don't know what the future holds with my mother, and perhaps that's the way it's meant to be. My priority now is healing and surrounding myself with people who love me for who I am, without conditions or expectations. I hope one day I'll fully release the pain and be able to look back at this time as a difficult chapter in a much larger, richer story of resilience and self-discovery. As time went on, I found myself trying to make peace with the situation, but the unresolved feelings and painful memories lingered. Each time I heard news about my mother, especially about how she was faring under the caregiver's influence, I felt a pang of regret and helplessness. My mind would spin with questions. Was she safe? Did she ever think about the things she said to me? Was there a part of her that missed having me in her life, even if she would never admit it? It's hard to walk away from family, especially a parent, even when you know that staying connected only brings pain. I spent years wanting a mother who was warm, supportive, and loving, but I finally had to accept that she wasn't capable of being that person for me. Coming to terms with this reality was gut-wrenching, but also liberating. It freed me from the endless cycle of trying to win her approval, of trying to fix things that were beyond my control. In my quest to move forward, I poured my energy into relationships that brought me joy and into hobbies that reminded me of my own worth. My husband and I grew closer, finding strength in our shared experiences. We began taking weekend trips, exploring new places, and focusing on our own happiness. These little escapes were a balm for my spirit, and they reminded me of the life I wanted to build, a life that wasn't defined by the shadows of my past. I also became more involved in supporting people with disabilities, inspired by my nephew's resilience and joy. Working with others in the disability community gave me a new purpose and a way to make a positive impact in people's lives. In a strange way, this journey has allowed me to understand him better and to see the beauty in his spirit, even from a distance. Whenever I'm with him, I'm reminded that love and care are not about blood but about compassion and understanding. Over time, I noticed a shift within myself. I was beginning to heal. The anger and resentment that once consumed me started to fade, replaced by a sense of acceptance. I realized that my mother's actions were a reflection of her own unresolved issues and limitations, not a measure of my worth. She may never apologize or acknowledge the hurt she caused, but I no longer needed her validation to feel complete. This was perhaps the most freeing realization of all, that I could be whole even without her approval. Yet, my family's reaction to my efforts to defend myself was a lingering source of hurt. Some family members felt I'd overstepped by sharing the bank statements and text messages in the family group, but I don't regret it. It was my way of setting the record straight, of making it known that I had nothing to hide. The family's silence on the matter spoke volumes, but it also allowed me to see who I could truly count on. I found allies in unexpected places, cousins and friends who reached out privately to offer their support and share their own experiences with complicated family dynamics. These conversations helped me feel less alone and more understood. On difficult days, when old memories resurface or when I hear another rumor about myself or my mother's accusations, I remind myself of the journey I've been on. I remind myself of my husband's unwavering love, my friends' support, and the resilience I've built through each painful encounter. And I remind myself of the good I'm doing now, of the people I'm helping, of the life I'm building. Perhaps the most significant lesson in all of this has been the importance of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're a way of defining where I end and someone else begins. Setting boundaries with my mother, even if it meant walking away, was a necessary step for my own well-being. It taught me that I am responsible for my own happiness and that sometimes, protecting my peace means making hard, painful choices. I've learned that it's okay to love people from a distance and to prioritize my own healing above the obligation to maintain toxic relationships. And now, as I continue to focus on building a life rooted in joy and authenticity, I am learning to forgive, not just my mother but myself. I'm forgiving myself for the times I compromised my own happiness to please others, for the years I spent seeking approval that was never mine to gain, and for the moments of anger and hurt that clouded my judgment. I'm also forgiving myself for the decision to step away, knowing it was the healthiest choice I could make for my own mental well-being. In the end, this experience has shaped me in ways I couldn't have imagined. It has strengthened my resolve, deepened my empathy, and taught me the true meaning of self-worth. I no longer feel the need to justify myself to others, nor do I feel the need to chase relationships that bring me pain. Instead, I am learning to honor myself, to embrace the love and support around me, and to live a life that is peaceful, fulfilling, and unapologetically mine. As for the future, I don't know what it holds with my mother. Maybe one day things will change, maybe they won't. But I've finally reached a place where I'm okay either way. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Free to live, free to love, and free to be me. Life after severing ties with my mother has been a mixture of bittersweet moments, realizations, and unexpected peace. I wish I could say that the decision to walk away meant immediate relief, but healing is far from linear. Some days I feel like I've made tremendous progress, while on others, memories creep in, bringing doubts and pangs of guilt. Yet, each step forward has brought me closer to the life I envision. A life where my worth isn't determined by someone else's approval, and where my happiness isn't tied to a relationship that's constantly filled with turmoil. In the time since I left, I've poured my energy into rebuilding my life in a way that nurtures me. I have surrounded myself with people who genuinely support me and uplift me, friends who check in, family members who quietly understood my decision, and my husband who has been my rock through every stage of this journey. I've learned that support doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's the quiet presence of someone who simply listens without judgment as you process your pain. It's the friend who understands when you need space, or the cousin who drops a message just to say they're thinking of you. These gestures, however small, have been a balm for my spirit, showing me that I am not alone. One of the biggest changes I've experienced is the sense of freedom that comes with reclaiming my identity. Without the constant need to manage my mother's expectations and demands, I've had the space to explore who I am outside of that dynamic. I found joy in hobbies I had long forgotten, reading novels, gardening, and even painting. These simple acts have been healing in ways I never anticipated. They remind me of the importance of nurturing my own happiness and of building a life that aligns with my values and passions. Therapy has also played a crucial role in my journey. Speaking with a therapist has allowed me to explore the deep-seated wounds left by years of emotional manipulation and control. It's helped me understand that while my mother's actions were hurtful, they stemmed from her own unresolved issues and limitations. This understanding doesn't excuse her behavior, but it has allowed me to let go of some of the anger and resentment I carried. Therapy has given me tools to manage the waves of guilt and self-doubt that occasionally surface, reminding me that setting boundaries was an act of self-respect, not abandonment. One of the most surprising outcomes of this journey has been the empathy I've developed for people in similar situations. I've connected with others who have had to make difficult choices about their own toxic family relationships, and these conversations have been eye-opening. Hearing their stories has reinforced the importance of prioritizing one's own mental and emotional well-being, even when it means making painful decisions. It's a reminder that family isn't always defined by blood, it's defined by love, respect, and mutual support. My relationship with my nephew remains complicated but precious. Despite the distance, I make an effort to stay connected with him. He's a reminder of the innocence and goodness that can persist even in challenging environments. Whenever I visit, I'm reminded of the resilience he shows in his own way. He has a joy that is unshaken by circumstances, and in many ways, he has taught me the value of finding happiness in small, simple moments. Being with him reminds me of the importance of compassion, not only toward others but also toward myself. As for my mother, I've come to terms with the fact that our relationship may never be what I once hoped for. I still feel a deep sadness when I think about her, and there's a part of me that will always wish things could be different. But I now understand that my well-being is more important than clinging to an illusion of family that only brings me pain. I've accepted that some relationships are best loved from afar. And while I may always hold a place in my heart for her, I have learned to protect my peace by keeping that love at a distance. In the end, walking away was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most empowering. It taught me that love and respect are two sides of the same coin, and that any relationship, especially with family, should honor both. I have learned to value myself, to set boundaries without guilt, and to pursue a life that reflects my own values and dreams. Looking to the future, I'm cautiously hopeful. I don't know what lies ahead, but I am determined to continue building a life filled with love, peace, and purpose. I am no longer defined by the approval or disapproval of others. I am defined by the strength I've gained through this journey and the kindness I choose to show myself and those around me. I am free and I am at peace. For the first time, I am living for me. As I continue to move forward, I'm beginning to understand the depth of what it means to truly heal and rebuild. Each day presents new challenges, but with them comes an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. It's a quiet, steady resilience that grows as I distance myself from the emotional upheaval of my past. I no longer wake up with the dread that once filled my mornings. Instead, I feel a sense of calm and purpose guiding me. One of the most profound realizations I've had is the importance of forgiveness, not for my mother but for myself. For so long, I held on to guilt and regret, wondering if I could have done something differently to change the outcome of our relationship. But as I reflect, I see that I did everything I could to love her, support her, and respect her, even when it came at the cost of my own well-being. Understanding this has allowed me to release the weight of self-blame that once weighed heavily on my shoulders. Forgiving myself has also allowed me to appreciate how much I've grown through this journey. I've learned to set healthy boundaries in all areas of my life, and I've become much more aware of the relationships I nurture. I now surround myself with people who respect me and treat me with kindness, and I've learned to walk away from those who don't. This has given me a newfound confidence, a sense of worth that is no longer dependent on anyone else's approval. Through this journey, my husband has been my unwavering support, showing me a love that is both grounding and freeing. His compassion and understanding have been a source of comfort in the most difficult moments, and his belief in me has helped me to believe in myself again. He has shown me what it truly means to have a partner who stands by you, not just in words but in actions. I am grateful for his strength, his patience, and his quiet encouragement that has reminded me that I am worthy of love and respect. My nephew continues to be a light in my life, even if from a distance. He represents resilience in a way that inspires me to keep going, to focus on the positive, and to find joy in the small moments. Though our connection may look different now, it remains a cherished part of my life. Every time I see him or hear about his progress, I'm reminded of the love that exists beyond all the difficulties and pain of the past. Looking forward, I'm focusing on creating a future that honors the person I am becoming. I am exploring new passions, reconnecting with old hobbies, and discovering what brings me peace and happiness. For the first time, I feel like I am building a life that is truly my own, free from the constraints of someone else's expectations or demands. This journey has not been easy, and there are still moments of sadness and longing for a different relationship with my mother. But I have come to accept that some things are beyond my control, and that is okay. Now, I'm learning to cherish the family I choose, the people who genuinely care for me and accept me for who I am. They are the ones who lift me up, who celebrate my successes, and who stand by me in times of need. This chosen family has shown me that love doesn't have to be complicated or conditional. It can be simple, joyful, and nurturing. With them, I have found a sense of belonging that I once searched for in all the wrong places. In many ways, this journey has brought me back to myself. I have reclaimed my voice, my confidence, and my peace of mind. I am no longer haunted by the need to prove my worth to anyone else. I am content with who I am, flaws and all, and I am learning to be gentle with myself. I still have dreams and goals to pursue, but they are my own, and that makes all the difference. If I could offer advice to anyone going through a similar experience, it would be this. Trust in your strength, honor your boundaries, and remember that you deserve a life filled with respect and love. It's okay to let go of relationships that cause you pain, even if they are with family. Your well-being matters, and your happiness is worth fighting for. As I step into this new chapter, I feel a sense of peace and freedom I once thought was impossible. I am ready to embrace a life that reflects my values, my dreams, and my true self. This journey has been long and difficult, but it has taught me invaluable lessons about love, resilience, and the power of self-acceptance. I am finally at peace with my past, and I am hopeful for the future. For the first time in a long time, I am free. And that, I have come to realize, is the greatest gift I could ever give myself. And so, after everything, I find myself standing at the crossroads of my past and future. The weight that once held me down has gradually lifted, piece by piece, until I can breathe again without the constant pressure of guilt, regret, or fear. I've learned that healing is not linear and that some wounds take time to close. Sometimes they don't close at all. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward, that we can't find new ways to live, love, and find peace. As I take each step into this new life, I no longer feel defined by the chaos or the pain of the past. My past doesn't control me anymore. It's simply a chapter in a much bigger story. The people who have loved me through the hard times, and the ones I've loved back, are what matter now. They are the constants in my life, the ones who see me for who I am and not for the mistakes or misunderstandings of my earlier years. Now, I focus on the present and what lies ahead, knowing that the future is filled with possibility. There are new dreams to chase, new memories to create, and most importantly, a new version of myself to discover. This is where my story ends. Right here where I choose peace, freedom, and self-love over everything else. And though I may never have the relationship with my mother that I once hoped for, I've learned that it's okay. Sometimes we don't get the relationships we want, but we can still create the life we deserve. And so, I walk forward, stronger, wiser, and at peace, ready for whatever comes next. My 38F husband, 40M, pushed me when I asked him about a weird text he received and refused to show me his phone. I am unsure what to do now. Here is an update to my previous post. The situation has left me feeling unsettled and confused, a tangled web of emotions that is hard to untangle. For a long time, I believed we had a solid relationship, built on trust and shared dreams, especially since we had been trying to start a family for some time. The journey has been filled with challenges from fertility issues to IVF, and I thought we were in it together. But after that incident, the air felt charged with something dark, something that had shifted between us. After the push, I spent a sleepless night, tossing and turning, my mind racing with questions that didn't have answers. I kept replaying the moment in my head. Why would he push me? What was in that text? Was I overreacting? These questions swirled like a storm, feeding my anxiety. I decided I needed to do something proactive about my health, both mental and physical. I planned on going to the hospital for a checkup when he was out. It was a small act of defiance against the unease that was settling in, a way to reclaim some autonomy in a life that suddenly felt constricted. But then the unexpected happened. He caught wind of my hospital visit plans. I don't want you going alone, he insisted. his tone betraying a hint of worry that seemed sincere on the surface. He said he was concerned about me and the baby, but it felt more like a control mechanism than genuine care. With his insistence, I felt the familiar stirrings of guilt creeping in. How could I be so selfish as to want to go to a checkup alone when he clearly wanted to be there for me? I acquiesced, suppressing my reservations, and allowed him to join me. The appointment felt like a blur. He was with me the entire time, hovering like a shadow, and I couldn't say anything to the nurses or doctors. I felt trapped in a bubble of silence, the walls closing in as I sat on that examination table. I could sense his anxiety and tension. He was trying to put on a brave face but couldn't mask the underlying irritation that seemed to bubble beneath the surface. The doctor spoke to us about my high blood pressure, and though I heard the words, they felt distant. My focus was divided, torn between my health and the man sitting next to me who felt both like my partner and an unexpected adversary. When we got home, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. His demeanor darkened as he began to complain about how hard this pregnancy had been for him. Each complaint felt like a needle, puncturing the fragile balloon of my emotions, inflating my frustration. It felt incredibly selfish, considering I was the one carrying this child, experiencing the hormonal roller coaster and the physical challenges that came with it. I wanted to scream that this was not just about him, but I bit my tongue instead. I was acutely aware of how much had changed since the push. It seemed like pushing back would only escalate tensions further, so I decided to keep quiet, tucking my feelings away like a secret I couldn't share. Later, when he left for the gym, I seized the opportunity. I called my OBGYN's clinic and left a voicemail explaining the truth behind my fall earlier that day. I was desperate for guidance, for a lifeline in this turbulent sea of uncertainty. But I knew that with my husband home, it would be difficult to have an open conversation, especially when he might overhear me discussing the underlying issues that had now crept into our lives. As I waited for a response, the silence of the house pressed in on me, amplifying my sense of isolation. I had grown increasingly aware of the mounting tension, the elephant in the room that neither of us dared to acknowledge. I was worried about how my husband would react if he saw my post or discovered I was reaching out for help. I had been deleting the Reddit app whenever he was around, fearful that he might stumble upon my thoughts laid bare for strangers to see. It was a risky game, one that made me feel like I was living in a secret world while desperately wanting to connect with those who might understand my plight. When he returned home, the conversation flowed as if nothing had changed, yet it was all I could think about. I put on a mask of normalcy, engaging in small talk about his workout, but inside I was a whirlwind of confusion and anxiety. I could feel the walls of our home closing in on me, every familiar corner now tinged with a sense of foreboding. I kept my eyes on the ground, my heart pounding in my chest, the echo of that push haunting my thoughts. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I reflected on how everything had shifted so drastically in such a short time. My husband's anger issues, which I had brushed off as stress-related before, now felt like a growing storm that could erupt at any moment. He had acknowledged his anger, often in tears, promising to be better, but the cycle of abuse had become a narrative woven into our lives. It was as if I had been living in a fog, mistaking his behavior for protectiveness and love, only to find myself waking up to the reality that had been hiding in plain sight. I thought about the comments from my previous post, how they had shed light on the patterns I had overlooked. Friends had gradually drifted away over the years, replaced by his friends, his family. I had isolated myself without realizing it. I could hear the echoes of his disparaging words in my mind, the moments he cussed me out or belittled me, and I had justified it all as stress. The stress of our IVF journey had been overwhelming, but I now understood it was no excuse for the way he treated me. In a moment of clarity, I recognized that I had made excuses for his anger, believing it was a reaction to our struggles rather than an inherent part of his character. I was frightened by what had unfolded and what it revealed about the man I had chosen to spend my life with. The thought of leaving him was terrifying. I felt paralyzed by uncertainty. Where would I go? How could I ensure my safety? The next day loomed ahead of me, and as I awaited a response from my OBGYN, I felt a blend of hope and dread. I knew I had to take steps to safeguard myself and the baby. I had to confront the truth of my situation, no matter how painful it might be. And in that moment of quiet resolve, I found a flicker of determination within myself. I would reach out for help, and I would not let fear dictate my choices any longer. The journey ahead would be daunting, but I knew that I had to take the first step, even if it was just a whisper in the dark. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I lay in bed, my mind racing with the events of the past few days. My heart felt heavy, each beat echoing the doubts that had taken root in my mind. I had survived another night under the same roof as my husband, but I was painfully aware of how precarious that survival felt. The fear that gripped me was compounded by the deep sense of isolation. It was a feeling that left me longing for connection, for someone who could understand the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. I spent the morning running through potential scenarios in my head, trying to map out my next moves while keeping my anxiety in check. I was stuck in a cycle of fear and confusion, questioning every decision I made, every word I spoke. When my husband left for work, I breathed a sigh of relief. The silence that filled the house was both comforting and haunting. It gave me the space to think but also magnified the weight of my situation. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand, my heart racing as I stared at the screen. I had left a voicemail for my OBGYN's office the day before, but I knew I needed more than just a voicemail. I needed to talk to someone who could help me navigate the complexities of my situation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I had been avoiding. The prospect of talking about my relationship felt daunting, but I also recognized it as a necessary step. With shaking hands, I dialed the number for my doctor's office. After what felt like an eternity of ringing, the receptionist answered, her cheerful voice contrasting sharply with my internal turmoil. I felt like I was in a movie, where everything around me seemed out of sync with the chaos in my mind. "How can I help you today?" she asked, and I found my voice, albeit trembling. "I need to speak with someone about my health and some personal issues I'm dealing with," I managed to say, my throat tightening with the weight of unspoken truths. The receptionist sensed the gravity in my tone and quickly transferred my call to a nurse. The nurse, with a kind and calming demeanor, listened as I explained the high blood pressure I had experienced during my last visit and the recent fall I had taken. I chose my words carefully, avoiding the details that would lead back to my husband's behavior, not yet ready to lay bare the extent of my fears. The nurse asked a few questions and I could feel my heart rate slowing as she provided reassurance that I wasn't alone in this. "We're here to support you," she said, her tone soft and encouraging. "It's important to discuss any stressors you may be facing. Would you like to schedule an appointment to talk more in depth?" "Yes, please," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been just moments before. I hung up the phone feeling a flicker of hope. I had taken an important step towards seeking help, yet the underlying anxiety remained. After the call, I felt a sense of urgency to reflect on the comments from my last post. I had shared my experience on Reddit, hoping for insights, and the responses flooded in. Many commenters had pointed out the subtle signs of emotional abuse, and as I reread their words, it became increasingly clear to me that I had been minimizing my husband's behavior for far too long. I felt a deep pit in my stomach, the realization that my perception of love had been distorted. I recalled moments when his anger flared, the words he had hurled at me during arguments, and the way I had learned to walk on eggshells to avoid setting him off. He had always expressed regret after these outbursts, promising he would do better, and I believed him each time. But now, as I reflected on our relationship, it felt as though I had been trapped in a cycle of denial, convincing myself that his love outweighed the harsh moments. The thought was painful but necessary. I needed to confront the truth if I was ever going to find my way out. The fear of leaving him still loomed large in my mind. I kept replaying the question, where would I go? I didn't have a safety net, no family nearby to support me, no close friends I could reach out to. Most of my friendships had faded into the background as I had grown more entwined in his world. Even if I had wanted to escape, how could I do so without a plan? In that moment of contemplation, I decided I needed to reach out for guidance. I remembered the domestic hotline I had considered before, the resource I had hesitated to contact due to my husband's presence. The thought of him finding out terrified me. But I realized that the hotline could provide the resources and advice I desperately needed, even if it meant risking discovery. I resolved to call them during his workout that evening. As the day wore on, I busied myself with household chores, trying to distract myself from spiraling thoughts. Each task felt like a small victory, an assertion of my autonomy in a situation that felt increasingly suffocating. I felt my strength returning, a quiet determination surging within me. When my husband returned home, I put on a cheerful facade, hoping to mask the turmoil roiling inside. We engaged in small talk, but I could feel the tension in the air, an undercurrent that neither of us acknowledged. As I prepared dinner, I sensed his eyes on me, scrutinizing, judging. Each movement I made felt amplified, like I was performing in front of an audience that demanded perfection. Later that night, when he left for the gym, I felt the weight of the moment settle upon me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I dialed the hotline's number. My heart raced as I waited for someone to answer, my palms clammy against the phone. The call connected and a kind voice greeted me, ready to listen. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, the feeling of being heard for the first time in far too long. I shared my story, carefully articulating the circumstances surrounding my relationship without revealing too much. The person on the other end offered compassionate insights, validating my feelings and emphasizing the importance of my safety. They guided me through the resources available to me, reassuring me that I was not alone in this journey. For the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of hope rekindling within me. After the call, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had taken steps to reclaim my narrative, to carve out a path forward. My husband's controlling behavior had cast a long shadow over my life, but I knew that I could begin to step into the light. I resolved to continue seeking support, whether through my OBGYN, the hotline, or even anonymous forums where I could find solace among those who understood. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a mixture of fear and hope swirling within me. I was terrified of what the future might hold, but I was equally invigorated by the knowledge that I had taken action. I was no longer willing to silence my voice. The road ahead would be uncertain, but I knew that I could navigate it one step at a time. The sun rose the next morning, casting a soft glow through the curtains, but I felt a stark contrast within me. Despite the light streaming into my room, I still felt heavy with anxiety, my mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. I had taken some crucial steps toward seeking help, yet the uncertainty of my situation weighed heavily on my shoulders. With each passing hour, I could feel the tension building, the pressure of living in a situation that felt increasingly untenable. After my husband left for work, I took a moment to breathe deeply and center myself. I had the day ahead of me, a chance to reclaim a little more of my autonomy. The idea of bed rest loomed over me, but I knew I needed to utilize my time wisely. I picked up my phone and checked for a response from my OBGYN's office. To my relief, I had a missed call. They had left a message confirming my appointment for later in the week. As I listened to the voicemail, a surge of anticipation flooded through me. The opportunity to speak with my doctor about my health and well-being, and perhaps about my relationship, was a small beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. I immediately started jotting down notes, bullet points of the thoughts swirling in my mind, ensuring I wouldn't forget anything important. The impending appointment felt like a lifeline. I needed to be prepared to discuss the reality of my situation candidly. With my mind racing, I turned my focus to practical matters. I rummaged through the cupboards, gathering items for a healthy meal. Preparing food had always been a form of therapy for me, a way to channel my emotions into something tangible. I chopped vegetables and sautéed them, trying to immerse myself in the rhythmic motion of cooking. Yet, no matter how much I focused on the task at hand, my mind kept drifting back to the underlying tension of my marriage. As I stirred the mixture in the pan, I felt the familiar pang of frustration rise within me. I had spent so long minimizing my husband's behavior, convincing myself that he loved me in his own way, even when his actions contradicted that love. I recalled our early days together when everything had felt effortless and joyful. How had we spiraled into this cycle of control and fear? I longed for that sense of security again, but I realized I couldn't just wait for things to change. I needed to take decisive action to protect myself and my baby. When I finished cooking, I sat down with my meal and opened my laptop. It was time to dig deeper into the resources available for someone in my situation. I began researching support groups, both online and in person, that focused on domestic abuse and emotional health. As I read through the stories shared by others, I felt a sense of camaraderie with women who had walked similar paths. It was validating to know that I wasn't alone in my feelings of confusion and fear. As I scrolled through various articles and forums, a common theme emerged: the importance of creating a safety plan. This was a crucial step I hadn't fully considered. I began making a list of essential items I would need in case I had to leave quickly. Identification, important documents, some cash, items I had never thought I would need to gather but now seemed crucial. The gravity of the situation sank in, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I started formulating a plan. By the time my husband returned home that evening, I had a small bag packed with the essentials I had listed. I had hidden it in a place he would never look, a small corner of the closet just behind some shoes. It felt surreal to prepare for the possibility of leaving, but I knew it was necessary. As he walked in, I put on my best smile, feigning normalcy, yet my heart raced with the weight of my secret. Dinner was quiet. He complained about work and I nodded along, careful not to say anything that might provoke his anger. After our meal, I retreated to the living room, picking up a book to distract myself. I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move, but I held my ground. I was determined to keep my thoughts to myself, resisting the urge to voice my concerns or questions. That night as I lay in bed, I replayed the events of the day in my mind. I felt a new sense of resolve building within me. I was no longer just a passive participant in my life. I was starting to take charge. I thought about the support group I had found online, an organization dedicated to helping women in similar situations. They had scheduled a meeting for the upcoming week, and I had marked my calendar, eager to attend. The days passed slowly, each one feeling like an eternity as I carefully navigated the complexities of my marriage. My husband continued to express his frustrations about my pregnancy, often making dismissive remarks about my condition. I felt trapped in a cycle of pretending, hiding my true feelings while he controlled the narrative of our lives. I was constantly on edge, fearing what might happen if I let my guard down. Finally, the day of my appointment with my OBGYN arrived. As I made my way to the clinic, a mix of excitement and dread swirled in my stomach. I had rehearsed what I would say, determined to express my fears and concerns without sugarcoating my experiences. This was my opportunity to seek the guidance I needed, to shed the weight of isolation that had burdened me for far too long. When I arrived at the clinic, the familiar smell of antiseptic filled the air, and I took a deep breath as I checked in. The nurse led me to the exam room, and I felt my heart race as I sat on the examination table, the familiar anxiety creeping in. I could feel my hands shaking as I waited for the doctor to enter. When my OBGYN walked in, she greeted me warmly, her smile easing some of my tension. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, and I could hear the genuine concern in her voice. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal, but as I looked into her eyes, I felt a surge of trust. "I've been feeling overwhelmed," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "My blood pressure has been high and there's been a lot going on at home." As I began to share my story, the words poured out of me like a dam breaking. I explained the incidents of pushing, the emotional turmoil, and my concerns for both my well-being and my babies. The relief of finally vocalizing my fears was cathartic, and I could see the concern growing in my doctor's eyes. She listened intently, nodding along as I spoke. When I finished, she took a deep breath, and the gravity of my situation settled into the room. "I'm so glad you came in today," she said softly. "It's important to address these issues, and I want you to know that you deserve support. We can discuss a safety plan and resources that can help you navigate this." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen, truly seen, as if the weight of my burdens was shared. The path ahead was still unclear, but I knew I had taken a significant step forward. My doctor's words of support resonated deeply, and I could feel a flicker of hope igniting within me. As I left the clinic, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the parking lot. I took a moment to breathe deeply, savoring the fresh air and the weight lifted from my shoulders. My doctor had given me the assurance I desperately needed, and I was determined to take further steps toward regaining control over my life. I returned home with a newfound sense of purpose. It was time to act, not just for myself but for my baby. I was still on bed rest, but I could focus on creating a plan that would pave the way for a safer future. After some contemplation, I decided to reach out to the support group I had found online. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I knew that attending would provide me with the insight and camaraderie I craved. That evening, when my husband returned from work, I did my best to maintain the facade of normalcy. I greeted him with a smile, aware of the tension that had been brewing in our home. He seemed to sense something was different, a subtle shift in my demeanor, but I played it off as my excitement about the upcoming doctor's appointment. As we sat down for dinner, the conversation turned to his day. He complained again about the stresses of work and how difficult it was to manage everything. I nodded along, silently reflecting on how he often shifted the focus away from my struggles. His need to dominate the narrative only solidified my resolve to seek help. I wouldn't allow him to dictate my emotions any longer. After dinner, I retreated to the living room with my laptop, preparing to join a virtual support group meeting for women experiencing domestic abuse. The online community felt like a safe haven, a space where I could share my thoughts and fears without judgment. As I logged on, my heart raced with anticipation. Would I find the understanding I needed? The meeting began, and I was struck by the vulnerability and strength of the women in the group. Each shared their stories, their struggles, and their paths toward healing. I listened intently, my heart aching for the experiences they had endured, but I also felt inspired by their resilience. It became clear that I was not alone. There were countless others navigating the same treacherous waters. When it was my turn to speak, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I introduced myself, shared my background, and explained my situation. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of my words lifting. The understanding nods and encouraging comments from the group reassured me that I was taking the right steps. They offered suggestions, resources, and, most importantly, empathy that resonated deeply. One woman's story struck a chord with me. She spoke of how she had once felt trapped and helpless, much like I did, but through perseverance and support, she had found a way to leave her abusive relationship. Her words ignited a spark within me, a glimmer of hope that I too could find a way out of the darkness. After the meeting, I felt invigorated. I began taking notes on the resources they had shared, including hotlines, shelters, and legal assistance. I was determined to have a comprehensive plan in place. The idea of leaving still filled me with trepidation, but I knew that knowledge was power. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. I continued to monitor my health, adhering to the bed rest guidelines while also strategizing my next steps. I discreetly gathered important documents, ensuring they were easily accessible if I needed to leave. I even spoke to a few trusted acquaintances about the possibility of staying with them temporarily. I could feel the walls closing in, but I also felt a flicker of hope that propelled me forward. In the midst of this whirlwind, I noticed a shift in my husband's behavior. He seemed more anxious, perhaps sensing my growing resolve. He began asking more pointed questions about my daily activities and was noticeably more critical of my needs. I felt a mix of fear and frustration. The tension was palpable, and I knew I had to tread carefully. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, he confronted me about my behavior. "What's going on with you? You've been acting strange lately," he asked, his tone sharp. I felt my heart race, a sense of dread washing over me. "I'm just trying to take care of myself and the baby," I replied, attempting to deflect the conversation. But he wasn't having it. "Are you hiding something from me? You can tell me if there's an issue." "I'm here for you," he insisted, his voice laced with an edge that made me uncomfortable. I forced a smile, trying to maintain my composure. "I appreciate your concern. It's just been a lot lately," I said, carefully choosing my words. I could feel the tension rising between us, and I knew I had to navigate this carefully. The days turned into a blur of tension and heightened anxiety. I kept my communication with the support group active, utilizing the guidance they offered. The members had become a source of strength for me, reminding me that I was not alone in this fight. Finally, the day of my follow-up appointment with my OBGYN arrived. As I sat in the waiting room, my stomach churned with nerves. I knew I needed to discuss my husband's behavior with her, but I also feared how she might react. Would she understand the depth of my struggles? When I was called back, my doctor greeted me warmly, her genuine concern evident. "How have you been feeling since our last appointment?" she asked, settling in across from me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. "I've been managing my health, but I've been feeling overwhelmed by my situation at home," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. As I shared my concerns, I could see her expression shift from concern to determination. She listened intently, taking notes and nodding as I explained my husband's anger issues and the incidents that had left me shaken. When I finished, she leaned forward, her tone serious but compassionate. "It's crucial to prioritize your safety and well-being, especially during this time," she said firmly. "We can discuss options for support, and I can help you create a safety plan that ensures you and your baby are protected." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I realized that I had taken a significant step forward by voicing my concerns. Together, we began mapping out a comprehensive plan that included emergency contacts, safe locations to go, and resources available to me. As we discussed various options, I felt a surge of empowerment. I was reclaiming my voice, no longer silenced by fear. The realization that I had a plan in place ignited a fire within me. I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting for my future. After my appointment, I left the clinic with a renewed sense of purpose. I was determined to act on the steps we had outlined. My next goal was to connect with the local domestic violence hotline for additional resources. When I returned home, the atmosphere felt different, charged with an undercurrent of tension. My husband's demeanor had shifted again, and I could feel his watchful gaze as I entered the house. I kept my head high, determined not to show any signs of fear. I was reclaiming my narrative. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a mixture of fear and hope swirling within me. I knew I had the strength to continue moving forward, and with each step, I was building a path toward freedom. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows in the bedroom. I woke up feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. Today was the day I had decided to take another crucial step toward reclaiming my life. I had spent countless hours preparing, but now it was time to put my plan into action. The phone call to the domestic violence hotline was on my agenda, and I felt both nervous and empowered as I dialed the number. With each ring my heart raced faster. What would I say? How would I convey the urgency of my situation? I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the strength I had gained from the support group and my OBGYN. When a kind voice finally answered, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you for calling the domestic violence hotline. How can I help you today? I hesitated for a moment, grappling with how to articulate the complexity of my situation. I'm currently in an abusive relationship. My husband has anger issues and I'm scared for my safety, especially with my pregnancy. The woman on the other end listened attentively, her voice calm and reassuring. You've taken an important step by reaching out. Can you tell me more about what's been happening? As I shared my story, I felt the burden of my fears begin to lift. The woman provided me with resources, outlining immediate steps I could take to ensure my safety. We discussed the importance of having an emergency bag prepared, and she helped me identify potential safe places I could go if the situation escalated. I realized that this conversation was not just about seeking help, it was about empowering myself. I hung up feeling a sense of clarity and determination. I was no longer willing to live in fear. The next step was to create a more concrete plan, and that included finding a safe place to stay. Later that day, while my husband was at the gym, I took the opportunity to pack an emergency bag discreetly. I gathered essentials, clothing, important documents, my phone charger, and a few personal items. I made sure to keep it hidden in the back of the closet, ready for when the moment came to leave. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I prepared. I was taking control of my life, piece by piece. In the days that followed, I remained vigilant, trying to balance the appearance of normalcy at home while preparing for my exit. My husband continued to express his frustrations about the pregnancy, often making dismissive comments that only reinforced my resolve. I could feel his impatience growing, and I knew that the walls were closing in. But I held on to the strength I had found in the support group and my conversations with the hotline. One evening, while I was cooking dinner, my husband entered the kitchen, a scowl on his face. What's for dinner? You've been pretty lazy lately, he remarked sharply. His words struck me like a blow, but I refused to let them sink in. I'm trying to take care of myself and the baby, I replied, keeping my tone steady. He rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. This is so typical. You're always looking for an excuse. The tension between us crackled in the air, and I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I knew I had to tread carefully, but my resolve only solidified with his dismissive attitude. The following week, I decided to reach out to a local women's shelter to inquire about available options. They provided me with valuable information, assuring me that they could assist with housing and resources. I felt a flicker of hope as I listened to the compassionate woman on the other end of the line. I want you to know that you're not alone, she said. We're here to help you find a safe place, and we can provide resources for you and your baby. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. I was inching closer to freedom, but the thought of leaving everything behind was daunting. I had no idea how my husband would react if he found out, and that uncertainty weighed heavily on my mind. The days turned into a blur of preparation, and my husband remained oblivious to the internal turmoil I was facing. I continued to attend the virtual support group meetings, leaning on the women who shared their experiences. Their stories inspired me, and I felt a sense of solidarity with them that bolstered my courage. Finally, the day arrived when I felt ready to take the leap. My husband had planned a weekend trip with his friends, giving me the perfect opportunity to execute my plan. I spent the entire day ensuring everything was in place, my heart racing with anticipation. As the sun began to set, I packed my emergency bag, feeling a mix of exhilaration and terror. I knew that once I left, there would be no turning back. I drove to the shelter, my heart pounding as I navigated the familiar streets. I felt like I was moving through a dream, every moment heightened by the gravity of my decision. When I arrived at the shelter, I was greeted with warmth and understanding. The staff guided me through the intake process, providing me with information about resources and support available for mothers in similar situations. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I realized I had finally taken the step toward a safer future. In the following days, I settled into my new temporary home, grateful for the support I found in the shelter. I connected with other women, sharing our stories and lifting each other up. We formed a bond through our shared experiences, and I felt a sense of empowerment that had long eluded me. During this time, I kept in touch with my OBGYN, who continued to check in on my health and well-being. She expressed her relief that I had found a safe space and offered resources to ensure I could maintain my health during this transition. The support I received from her and the shelter staff was invaluable, reminding me that I was not alone in this journey. As the weeks passed, I reflected on the path that had brought me here. I had endured so much, but I was also discovering my own strength and resilience. I began to envision a future where I could raise my baby in a safe and nurturing environment, free from the shadow of fear. I continued attending therapy sessions provided by the shelter, which helped me process my experiences and develop coping strategies for the road ahead. I was learning to navigate my emotions, and each session brought me closer to healing. Eventually, the day came when I could take my baby home from the hospital. It felt surreal, holding my little one in my arms as I walked through the door of the new place I would call home. I was filled with hope for the future, knowing that I was breaking the cycle of abuse and creating a loving environment for my child. Though the journey ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, I felt equipped to face it. I had the support of my newfound community, the strength I had discovered within myself, and a determination to build a life free from fear. As I stood in the quiet of my new home, I took a moment to breathe deeply, savoring the fresh start before me. I had taken the leap into the unknown, but I was ready to embrace the possibilities of a brighter future.